Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're watching us. Welcome to the Tower at UNN. As always, we come to you every Sunday with a different program. I want to thank everyone who's here, who's been able to make it, and I hope that you're all within good health and you're all within everything you projected to come has come, and if it hasn't come, it's on the way to be received by yourselves. But as it is within tradition, every before we get into anything else, first we have to listen to the national anthem. Then when we get back from the national anthem, I will introduce today's show, and today I have also my co-host with me in the background, and he'll come on after the national anthem, and today we'll be with Senior Kintu. But without further ado, we'll first listen to the national anthem and then pick up from there.
Oh, Uganda, may God uphold thee. We lay our future in thy hand. United, free, for liberty, together we'll always stand. Oh, Uganda, the land of freedom, our love and labor we give, and with neighbors all at our country's calling, peace and friendship.
Welcome back from the national anthem. Before we get into our program today, I'd like to give a trigger warning for today's program. For those, it's going to be a heavy-hearted program as we're going to be looking at a violent period within the Great Lakes region that has happened over time. But before we even get into what our program is, I would like for us to then move to the state anthem for today. We will be playing the state anthem from Chigezi State. But before that, I'd like to introduce Senior Kintu to come and also give his salutations to the audience.
Thank you, Desire. My fellow Ugandans and all our friends in the Great Lakes region of particularly Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Southern Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, welcome to this program. We hope that you will pay attention to the revelations which are going to be exposed in this program. As you all know, no other channel is going to give you the real truth behind what is going on in our region. Why are our people being killed? And why is it one specific ethnic group, which is not even indigenous to our region, causing all these problems to our people? And they have tried for many years, if not centuries, to cover up their dirty, sinister, diabolic, and criminal activities. We are here to expose all that information so that you know, because knowledge is power. Thank you very much, and we are looking forward to a very healthy and a productive discussion.
For that, and without further ado, we will head into our state anthem for today, which will be coming from Chigezi State. And I'll ask the producer to please go ahead and play Chigezi State anthem.
Kigezi, Kigezi, insi yanje nyamurungi, amahanga gona nigakutangarira. kwijuza ubugega inshozi n'ipanga inyamisha n'amahamba ishori murungi emigera n'ingezi ensya n'intungi ebihingwa nitweza nikurira ensi yanje nenyesimiza shimwa mana shimwa nitukusima tukababyona owatwanjire turi abanyakigezi nitukusimira nensi tukigezi entima y'omulungi wa Afrika kigezi kigezi ensi y'amamanzi tubonera omunda n'omumbeleka turi abakozi kandi abanyabwenge enkunzi z'abantu nitwakira buri omwe twine enkwatanisa netukunde entunguka twine obufura kandi twine amazima ninkurira ensi yanje neyesimisa shimwa mana shimwa nitukusima tukababyona owatwanjire turi abanyakigezi nitukusimira nensi tukigezi entima y'omulungi wa Afrika kigezi kigezi mwije tukwatanise ab'enganda zona tushonjerane twombekezi yetu ezahamutindo twegese minyeto ekunde by'obuhangwa tuhabulane emitwalize ebyobwegese n'amagara marungi hangara kigezi hangara shimwa mana shimwa nitukusima tukababyona owatwanjire turi abanyakigezi nitukusimira nensi tukigezi entima y'omulungi wa Afrika entima y'omulungi wa Afrika
The more we listen to all the state anthems, the more it stands on its own that Uganda is really a nation of nations, or Uganda itself is a nation in the midst of so many other nations. Because in all these anthems, written by, of course, the ancestors and the peoples of those different parts and lands, are claimed for that to be a nation, not a tribe, not an ethnic group, but a nation that has formed itself there socially, economically, politically, in all forms and nature. But with that being said, I'd like to welcome you again, Mr. Chintu, to today's show. As you said, today's show is going to be about looking into the revelations and the information that has been found and collected over the years by different people, but also by yourself, by conducting interviews and looking at all the photographic evidence that has been given. As we know, history is always, what's the saying? The winner always writes history. And that's why in our today world that we live in, our history has been watered down and whitewashed to serve the empire goals of the imperialists who dictate what deaths are celebrated and what deaths are not celebrated. Which brings me to today we're going to be looking specifically in the case of Rwanda and what happened with the Rwandese genocide, before the Rwandese genocide, after the Rwandese genocide, but we're going to go a bit back into history. That's why, for my first question, I would like for you to please break down for our audience the concept of the Abanyiginya and the Abega, I think was the name. The two different groups that now came together and came into a merger as they moved into where they settled as the Tutsis in that region, taking over control over the Hutus who they found in that region and the Twas.
Thank you. Yes, we now have the information regarding these two groups. The Abanyiginya, it is now known they migrated from present-day Sudan or southern Sudan thereabout. They were also cattle people. They were looking for green pastures for their cattle. We don't know whether 400 or 500 years ago there was a drought in that region that forced them to move southward. And indeed they did, looking for green pastures. Then there is another group called Abega, which originated from present-day Ethiopia, Eritrea. They were also a small group they were also cattle keepers, but they did not migrate because they were looking for green pastures. They were kicked out of their region because of their criminal and satanic practices of poisoning anybody who was not one of them. Now, when they converged in this area of ours, which is Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, they made a pact that they should now, since both of them were cattle keepers, they should now try to take over this green pasture land and graze their cattle in peace. But after having exterminated the indigenous people whom they found there. Now, the indigenous people were the Hutus of Rwanda, or rather you could call them the Bantu group, who were basically agriculturists, and they had established their own system of governance with their own chiefs. And the first thing they did was to make their daughters available to all the ruling people in this newfound land. And by so doing, the poor chiefs were attracted to these new exotic women who looked different from them, not knowing that something disastrous is going to happen to them. On a specific day, which these invaders designed secretly, they poisoned all the ruling class of that territory, particularly Rwanda, Burundi. After poisoning them, they posed as the widows of the deceased chiefs. And they took over the territory by poisoning everybody. A very reason why these Abega were kicked out of Eritrea area. Poisoning. And they have been good at it ever since. Now you are seeing it also being practiced in Uganda. How many prominent people we have lost, including religious people, through poisoning. And who is poisoning them? No one else but these so-called Batusi. So we have to be very careful with these people. And we have to be very careful because they have used their women to entice our men. And by so doing, many of those who have been enticed into marrying or associating with these women have been killed by poisoning and any other means. So we have to be very careful. And this is why we have to learn their history. Now, according to what we know, these people did not come as Batusi. They were cattle keepers And their name at the time of arrival was, they were called Abatanzi, which
mm,
meant people who keep cattle. Now, the local people, the Bahutu, could not pronounce it properly, and then they, for some reason, they manipulated that pronunciation, which also turned out to be Abatusi, from the original word Abatunzi, which meant in
mm,
the Kinyarwanda or the Hutu language, people who keep cattle. Abatu, I think what they said was, from what I know, Abatunzi Bente, who are keeping cattle. And then it became Abatusi. Now, these guys came with their Hamitic language because in this region, everything was Bantu. They discarded their Hamitic language and they picked up the Hutu language, which
mm,
now they call Rwanda. This is not
mm,
the original language. And if you talk to the people of Rwanda and Burundi, they will tell you that in spite of having adopted our language, there are some vowels which they cannot pronounce properly. So there is still that little element of division between the Hutu way of speaking Kinyarwanda and the Tutsi way of speaking Kinyarwanda. So they imposed a regime of killing, killing, and intimidation, and lying and stealing up to this very day. In other words, they have contributed virtually nothing but misery to the people or the indigenous people of this corridor. We are talking about the Great Lakes region.
mm. So, Mr. Chetu, so now we look into the history and we look how these two groups come together and become the Tutsis, and then we know when we go back in history that they ended up taking over, offering security or military support to the, and we all know that was it's the same way how the British offered security for Buganda Kingdom. It was a contract that was null and void and only for the benefit of the Batutsis, and then they offer the securities to the Hutu and the Twas, which the Twas was the a very low part of the population, which later leads to a whole decades of exploitation from amongst these groups. So that leads me up to now the external party enters, another group of invaders comes along, which is the colonizers. And then, right after, when it's time for the colonizers to pack up and leave, as African countries were getting independence, we start to see the narrative change. But before I ask you this question, I'm going to ask you the question and then we're going to watch the videos and we're going to speak about it. I want us to watch because I want our audiences to be able to see how history is written and rewritten for the purposes of serving what the imperialists want and who the imperialists are backing. And by this I mean like who have the people who have been, you mentioned a lot in your report, the people who have really been behind the Rwandan Patriotic Front, who funded it, who have been a part of it. So I want people to take note of how history. We're gonna go back to 1950s, 60s. We're gonna go back to the period of I don't want to mispronounce this name, but the period of Kayiira's revolution in 1959 and 60. And we're going to listen to some of what was said at that period of time. And when we look at how history was being recorded then to what we know now, that would be my question for you to elaborate further how uh, having a reactionary group in our region as the Batutsis versus the support that they get and how history has been rewritten to for their benefit. And if we're not careful, the same case can happen for Uganda if we do not plan and execute our plans accordingly. So I'm going to ask the producer to play two videos back to back. One of them is going to be a video of the first president of Rwanda talking Kayibanda, But I must warn the audience that some of these videos are in, there's a little bit of French, there's a little bit of Kinyarwanda. If you speak Nyankore or Uchiga, you might be able to pick up, or any Bantu language. But there's minimal English. And then we will, after those videos, we'll come back with that question in mind.
Des troubles éclatent en novembre 1959, opposant les contestataires Hutus aux autorités Tutsi. Le gouverneur place le pays sous le régime d'occupation militaire. Il confie tous les pouvoirs au colonel logiste. Le colonel logiste est un homme énergique. Dès son arrivée à Kigali, la capitale du Rwanda, en novembre 1959, un grand nombre de chefs et sous-chefs Tutsi sont arbitrairement destitués et remplacés à la hâte par des Hutus.
Les Tutsis, maltraités, menacés dans leurs biens, commencent à prendre le chemin de l'exil.
Le colonel logiste reçoit l'appui sans réserve de l'archevêque, monseigneur Pérodin. Il rétablit l'ordre, le seul ordre possible dans son esprit, un ordre Hutu excluant les Tutsis, malgré les protestations du roi Kayiira. C'est dans cette atmosphère trouble que des élections communales, boycottées par la majorité des Tutsis, ont lieu en juin et juillet 1960.
hanyuma bagomba gutora bajya ku mirongo buri musozi ukwawo muri iryo sahinde buri muntu asorora igitabo cye cy'umusoro mu gihe abaturanyi bakiyegeranye abapolisi nabo barashyira abantu ba buri gasozi ku mirongo imbere ya buri muryango w'ibiro by'itora.
Le Parmé Hutu, le parti de Grégoire Kayibanda, soutenu par l'Église et l'administration coloniale, obtient une éclatante victoire. Le 28 janvier 1961, le colonel logiste et Kayibanda décident de forcer le destin. Dans le plus grand secret, il suscite à Gitarama une réunion des bourgmestres et conseillers communaux récemment élus. Cette assemblée proclame la République. Grégoire Kayibanda est chargé de former un gouvernement.
Le roi Kigeli proteste et une nouvelle flambée de violence frappe notre pays. C'est en masse cette fois que les Tutsis prennent le chemin de l'exil.
Peu après, des élections législatives ont lieu. Elles confirment la victoire du Parmé Hutu, le parti de Grégoire Kayibanda. La royauté est abolie par référendum. Les nouveaux leaders Hutus, cooptés par le colonisateur, reprennent à leur compte la théorie des trois races.
Depuis l'existence du Rwanda, il existe un peuple rwandais, qui est composé de trois races distinctes. Oui. La race Hutu, qui comprend les 85% de la population. La race Tutsi, d'origine hamitique, qui comprend 14% de la population. Et la race pygmoïde qui comprend à peu près 1% de la population. Or, il se fait qu'au cours de notre histoire, la population Tutsi, la minorité de 14% de la population, a dominé l'immense majorité, comme est appelé en réalité le véritable peuple rwandais. Oui. Il a fait peser, cette minorité a fait peser sur lui tout le poids d'une féodalité aussi farouche, si pas plus farouche, que la féodalité du Moyen-Âge européen, jusqu'au tout dernièrement, en 1959, où le peuple Hutu, guidé par des leaders sortis des écoles chrétiennes et qui se sont levés contre un seul homme et qui ont commencé la révolution, que nous appelons nous autres la révolution sacrée.
Monsieur Makuza oublie que nous formons tous une seule nation, parlant la même langue, partageant les mêmes usages, les mêmes croyances, la même religion, les mêmes interdits. Désormais, les Tutsis vont être considérés comme des colonisateurs indésirables, des étrangers qu'il faut chasser du pays.
L'indépendance est proclamée le 1er juillet 1962 et Grégoire Kayibanda devient le premier président de la République du Rwanda. Mais l'incertitude continue à régner aux frontières. De temps en temps, la garde nationale rwandaise, dirigée par des officiers belges, affronte de petites bandes de Tutsis émigrés au Zaïre ou en Ouganda, qui tentent des raids désespérés. Ils sont décimés, quelques-uns arrêtés. On les appelle ici les Inyenzi, les Concrelats.
C'est plutôt une réaction de quelques aventuriers qui se servent d'une certaine jeunesse plutôt de bandits. C'est donc plutôt un problème de réduire le banditisme.
En décembre 1963, à la veille de Noël, quelques centaines de réfugiés Tutsis, mal équipés, venus du Burundi ceux-là, franchissent la frontière. Ils sont rapidement massacrés par la garde nationale rwandaise, commandée par des militaires belges.
C'est alors que commence l'horreur. Le président Kayibanda envoie un ministre dans chaque préfecture pour exciter les Hutus à la haine de leurs concitoyens Tutsis. De décembre 1963 à janvier 1964, plus de 10 000 Tutsis sont mis à mort avec une brutalité incroyable. Parmi eux, pour la première fois, des femmes et des enfants.
Les Rwandais et les Barundis ont pris le chemin le plus difficile qui soit, le chemin de la liberté. Cela, le chanteur aveugle de Gitarama Rwanda qui chante les bienfaits de l'indépendance et les mérites du président Kayibanda ne le sait pas. Les chiffres sont impitoyables. Dans 20 ans, la population du Rwanda et du Burundi aura doublé, 10 millions d'habitants qu'il sera impossible de nourrir sur un territoire grand comme une fois et demie la Belgique. Pays essentiellement agricole, le Rwanda et le Burundi dépendent d'une seule culture, le café, d'un seul client, les États-Unis. Mais déjà, la production du café est tombée cette année de 35 000 à 20 000 tonnes. Le déficit budgétaire est permanent. Sans le demi-milliard de francs versés chaque année par la Belgique, c'est la faillite. À cela s'ajoute au Rwanda un problème intérieur non négligeable, le fameux terrorisme Tutsi, les Inyenzi, les Concrelats comme ils se nomment, qui cherchent par la violence à reconquérir le pouvoir, à briser la révolution paysanne Hutu et à assassiner son leader, le président de la République, Grégoire Kayibanda.
Que faut-il penser, selon vous, des Inyenzi, des terroristes Tutsis? Est-ce que cela représente une force suffisante ou bien est-ce qu'une réaction désespérée de certains exilés Tutsis?
C'est plutôt une réaction de quelques aventuriers qui se servent d'une certaine jeunesse plutôt de bandits. C'est donc plutôt un problème de réduire le banditisme. Et d'ailleurs, depuis que vous-même vous avez circulé dans le pays, je ne sais pas si vous avez pu rencontrer ces terroristes Inyenzi. Le fait que vous vous trouvez dans une région comme celle-ci vous montre que le problème n'est pas spécialement important.
Mais le lendemain même de cette interview, les terroristes Tutsis venus du Congo, de Goma, pénétraient en masse dans le nord du Rwanda, à Rwengeri, où les villageois armés allaient les décimer un à un après une chasse à l'homme impitoyable et cruelle. La garde nationale rwandaise, cette jeune armée formée il y a 1 an et demi, encadrée par quelques Européens, allait recevoir son baptême du feu. C'était la plus sérieuse attaque Inyenzi depuis cette révolution Hutu qui avait chassé de leur pays 100 000 Tutsis, réfugiés au Congo, en Ouganda, au Tanganyika et même au Burundi. Ils étaient près d'une centaine, jeunes, décidés à marcher sur Kigali, la capitale, et à assassiner le président Kayibanda. L'attaque allait échouer. Voici les premiers prisonniers Inyenzi. Vous entendrez leur témoignage.
est-ce qu'il y a un plan d'assassinat des personnalités du gouvernement?
mbese ubu ngubu mutekereza kugira ngo mwice abantu bose abantu babakuru mbese ushobora kugira ngo mushobora kubyica mwarabitekereje
kuri je ntabwo nshobora kugira ngo mbice ariko abakuru bo babishaka hari
on doit tuer tout le monde.
Tous diront nous avons été enrôlés de force, mais ce tatouage sur le bras qui guérit le nom du moine exilé est un aveu. Pour la première fois, des documents et un butin de guerre important ont été saisis. Appareils photographiques soviétiques, divers ouvrages de propagande en provenance des pays de l'Est, et même un manuel d'astrologie dans lequel les Inyenzi auraient dû lire leur défaite. De l'argent aussi, des livres égyptiennes, le Caire manifeste souvent, semble-t-il, sa présence en Afrique noire. Aide financière soviétique, 2 kopecks. Bilan de cette opération, 35 Inyenzi tués, 25 prisonniers. Écoutons encore le témoignage d'un Inyenzi capturé à l'aube, il a 20 ans.
Pourquoi êtes-vous Inyenzi?
J'étais posé par les autres.
Donc vous affirmez que vous n'êtes pas Inyenzi?
Non, non.
Vous êtes Tutsi?
Si, je le suis.
Unariste?
Si.
Et maintenant, est-ce que vous avez peur?
De quoi?
De la population, du jugement, peur d'être tué?
Si c'est la mort, je dois mourir. Si ce n'est pas la mort, enfin...
Qu'est-ce qui va vous arriver maintenant?
Quoi?
Qu'est-ce que vous allez devenir maintenant?
Moi? Peut-être un prisonnier ou un mort ou comme ça.
Vous n'avez pas peur de mourir?
Tout le monde meurt.
Vous étiez obligé de venir avec les Inyenzi?
Si.
On vous a menacé?
Si.
Qu'est-ce qu'on vous a dit?
De venir. On m'a dit que je suis obligé de venir. Ils étaient arrêtés avec leurs 4 fusils.
Et que voulaient-ils faire? Tuer la population?
Tuer les gens de Kigali, je ne sais pas vous dire si c'est terre ou terre.
Mais vous voulez tuer des gens?
Si.
Des Européens aussi?
Aussi.
Welcome back from those 2 videos. I recognize that they're in languages that most of us might not be familiar with, but hopefully we were able to pick up a little bit of 1, 2 from any one of them. But Senior Kintu, with the question that I had asked before these videos, I wanted to point out 2 other things maybe to guide our conversation here. In this video, when the president at that point in time, I guess for this question to sum it up really well is, what did independence mean? Because the President Kayibanda went through the groups in Rwanda at that point in time. I remember there is a segment where he goes through them and he says the Twa, who are the descendants of this land, the Hutus, who are the majority of this land, and the Tutsis, who are of Hamitic descent. He says this in French, but you could tell that he was giving a synopsis of the people that were in that point in time. And there was voting, I presume, for a referendum to happen post-independence, before independence came. So my question is for you to go through with our audience. Then we can start to understand why maybe the Rwandese genocide happened, if we start to understand what the Rwandan Revolution meant in terms of independence. What did it mean for all these different groups that were cohabiting within Rwanda, or colonial Belgium Rwanda at that point in
time? Yes, that's a very good point. Although we didn't understand the French narration and the Kinyarwanda narration, but what we know about the history of this country is good enough to understand what they were saying in these strange languages to us. Now, you all know that Belgium was handed this new territory of Rwanda and Burundi by the UN Trusteeship Council after the defeat of Germany in World War I. Germany was the original colonizer of this territory. Germany had colonized both Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanganyika. Now, Belgium found that the Tutsi who were only less than 12% of the population had absolute control of this territory. And they had subdued the Bahutu and the Twa to the level of being actually slaves to these people. Now you got to remember, they were able to manage this territory through the rule of terror, lies, intimidation, and the most savage brutality. We have explained this before in some of our shows, but I will remind you so that you can understand. All the power and all the privileges were only in the hands of the Tutsi. The Hutus were nothing but slaves. A Hutu man had to work a certain number of hours every day as a slave to a Tutsi master for free in order to earn his right to live. In fact, this should be understood by you people, especially in Uganda, who saw way back in the late 40s and the 50s an influx of Bahutu migrant laborers in Uganda. We people from Masaka will remember that it was the labor of the Bahutu that built the agricultural economy of Masaka or Budu area. Because they had, although they were not being paid a lot of money, and I remember my father had a whole bunch of them working at his coffee garden. I think they were paying them 30 shillings a month. But to them, it was good money because if he stayed back in Rwanda, he would be laboring for zero. And sometimes he would even end up with a bunch of whips on his back for whatever reason, which he could not get when he's working as a laborer in Buganda. Another thing that was going on in Rwanda at that time, the Hutus could not have access to good education. The Hutus, many of the educated Hutus had to hide through the churches. As you know that Rwanda is a predominantly Catholic country, many of the so-called educated Hutus of this time had to pretend that they wanted to become priests. So in the seminary, it was the only place where they could have access to senior school education, which they couldn't get in if they enrolled at a public school, because the Tutsis could not allow a Mhutu to get a good education in a public school. When it comes to justice, there was no such a thing as justice. I have reported in some of my writings that, let me give you an example. If a Mhutu child, as you know, kids can play on the street or in the marketplace, and insulted or annoyed a Tutsi kid, that Tutsi kid would go home and tell his or her daddy that, oh, Mr. Kintu's son threw that rotten mango on my shirt. The dad would go to that family with a spear and kill that child. And there would be no police report. And if the parents ever screamed that you have killed my child, they too will be killed. That is why the Hutus developed a culture of not crying when death happens. Because if you cry or scream or whatever, you are killed as well. So you can see the reign of terror these Tutsis is imposed on the Hutus for hundreds of years. Another thing too, a Hutu being forced to be a slave to the Tutsis very few could even be allowed to hold a position of leadership. They could not, because all the leadership was in the hands of the Tutsis. And when the Belgians came and they saw that well-established system, that as it was, criminal as it was, they realized that if we are going to rule this territory and we try to disturb the setup, we're going to have a problem, because these guys are ruthless and they are well established. So the Belgians decided to have their hands off and let nature take care of itself. In the same way, the British did when it came to Buganda. When they found that we had an established kingdom, they did not disturb it. They just let it go. That's why some of our people accuse Buganda of having been treated by the British as the privileged class of Ugandans. Now, the injustice, although in Buganda we didn't have this kind of brutality with respect to the Mengo Kabaka's government, in Rwanda it was the opposite. They had very, very diabolic injustice and brutality against the Hutus. Now, the Catholic Church also found itself in a very delicate situation. Can we continue spreading the gospel in spite of the glaring criminal injustice going on? That is why we found in one of our previous reports that Father Paradon, who happened to be a Swiss and later on became a bishop, identified some of these young seminarians, because I told you that the Hutus could only hide in the seminary in order to access good education. But a good many of them were not really interested in being priests, including the late president of Rwanda, Habyarimana. He was also in the seminary. That is the only way he could get a good education. But he was not interested in being a priest. Now, anyway, Father Paradon used his connections back home in Switzerland and got a scholarship for this young guy called Gregory Kayibanda, sent him to Switzerland, got a very good education, because he was an articulate young man, just like we have Prince Paulo Chimbugwe here. Sent him to Switzerland, studied, came back, and started being an advocate for justice, and started writing regularly in that Catholic newspaper, which we talked about not too long ago, called Kinyamateka. He started publishing his, call it liberation ideology, through Kinyamateka, trying to awaken the people of Rwanda, particularly the Bahutu, to stand up and claim their right to be human in this country, and opposed what the Batusi were doing to them. Now, Kinyamateka, being the only newspaper that was popular in the country, the message spread out. And later on, they organized a political party, the Parabahutu. When independence was looming, the Belgians were aware that independence can come if we let the people elect their new leaders. Now, here is the problem. The Batusi wanted to maintain the status quo, that independence can come and be handed over to their king so that he can maintain the same system after independence when the Belgians are gone. The proper wind of change was calling for a democratic governance based on majority rule. Therefore, we have to have elections. The Parabahutu party, which was supported by the majority of the Hutus, who were actually the majority, won the elections. The Batusi had their own little party, which was supported by predominantly the Tutsis, who are a minority of less than 12%. Now, you can see mathematically who is going to win. When the Parabahutu party won, these guys cried murder. They said, no, this cannot be. It should be our party to maintain the leadership under the umbrella of a king. But democracy called for something different. So Kayibanda was elevated to the new leader of a free, independent Rwanda. And with that, they had to abolish the monarchy and established a republic. You have seen this even in the documents which we exposed not too long ago, the Abadehemuka. They are opposed to democratic governance. They are opposed to a republican system of governance. They prefer a monarchy, and not only a monarchy, an absolute monarchy whereby the king can even determine who should live and who should die. They are opposed to freedom and the respect of human rights. I would say they are no different from our Kakamega group in Uganda, which is also anti-democracy, anti-human rights, anti-freedom. And there is a marriage of convenience between those two groups. They are Abadehemuka and the Kakamega group of Buganda. They're operating up based on the same principles. Now, when Habyarimana, when Kayibanda took over, abolished the monarchy, there was a revolt. And the revolt ended up in physical fighting. Apparently, from what we know, and based on the people who were there, the Bahutu didn't have access to weapons. They didn't have guns. They just used sticks and machetes, and in some cases, spears. And they chased out the Tutsis who were resisting the wind of change. If the Tutsis had any sense in their heads, they should have compromised and let majority rule and accept to live under a new leadership. But to them, nobody has to be above a Mututsi except themselves. They are the only ones who they think that they were created by God to be rulers. In fact, this statement was echoed by Bishop Barnabas Harimana of Kabale, whom I exposed in my UDC newsletter many years ago, telling the trainees of RPF during the invasion, when his house in Kabale was a training camp, he told those fellows, young men, fight like hell because God created us to be rulers and the other people were created to be our slaves. These were the words of Bishop Barnabas of Kabale. And it has been echoed by other Tutsis as well. So that is not new. We have heard it before. The kicking out of these Batusi from Rwanda, many of them spread into Uganda, others went to Congo, Tanzania, and other places. Now, those who went into Uganda are the ones who regrouped, formed the NRA, and the RPF. Now, that is why this region is in trouble, because of this one group of murderers, killers, liars, thieves, and everything else. They have contributed nothing but suffering for our people.
And then, Senator, this brings me to the next question. Because as we can, within light of what you've just said now, when we watch back these video clips from that time, at that moment in time when the Rwandese revolution was happening, which was towards independence and the installment of a democracy, the Tutsis that left in exile were referred to as terrorists. But a few decades passed by, and their story is now being rewritten by their funders, and they are rewritten as heroes, the Rwandan Patriotic Front. Within line of that, could you please explain also how much of a role that the church played as a way to change the image of who, what the Rwandan Patriotic Front was, what they stood for, and what they wanted to do, and how the church, how not the church, but Catholic, how would I say that word? Catholicism, like the state of Catholic religion, has been used to mask everything behind, and what are the arguments over time that have happened? What role has the church, not the church itself, but the installation of this foreign church and religion played in manufacturing a new identity for the Rwandan Patriotic Front? Because when we watch in 1959, as we had Kaibanda speak, the Tutsis who left at that time during the revolution and towards independence, or what was termed as the Rwandese Revolution, are blatantly referred to as terrorists. But now in our era, and we look in the 90s, the run and if the Rwandese Patriotic Front has been planned ever since then to then the 90s, they are referred to as heroes. So what happened during that period of time, involving not only the politics in the region, but also their funders and also the church? How was the church used to silence, change narratives, and build a whole new image for what then was going to be the Rwandan Patriotic Front?
Your question has two parts. Let me start with the issue of the church. We have found out that the church was very instrumental in spreading what I would call the gospel of liberation among the Bahutus. If it was not the Catholic Church, there would have been no Kayiira. That's a fact of life. Now, if there was no Catholic Church, the monarchy of the Umwami would not have been deposed, because the liberation that the church instilled among the majority population was the background of the liberation of the Bahutus and getting rid of the monarchy. Now, these Bahutus who ran away maintained a vendetta spirit against the Catholic Church. To quote this drunkard Muhozi, he said on one of his statements recently that we are a people who never forget and never forgive. Now, that statement is very, very important in this respect, because they have never forgiven the Catholic Church for having aided the Bahutu to wake up and fight for their right. When they came around, when RPF invaded Rwanda, they used some of the Catholic Church people, including, as I said, the Bishop of Kabale, who was a Mutusi. You could probably say he was a Muchiga from Kisoro, but for all practical purposes, he was a Mutusi. For him, and for many of these Catholic religious people, religion is nothing. It is being a Mutusi that is most important. And they are willing and ready to do anything in the name of protecting and advancing the Batusi superiority. Now, when RPF invaded, they had already infiltrated Rwanda, especially through the Catholic Church. They had their men over there who were what you would call sleeping agents, identifying who is a Hutu, who is a Tutsi. When they invaded, they killed so many Catholic priests and the bishops and the nuns and lay people who were not Tutsis. I mentioned, I think on last Thursday, that they rounded up in Rwanda at the time they had 9 bishops, 9 dioceses. 5 of the bishops were Hutus and the 4 were Tutsis. The 4 Hutus, the 4 Tutsis, none of them has ever been killed. The 4 Hutu bishops were found at a place, I think you have it in that report which we exposed not too long ago, last Thursday. They were stripped naked, paraded around the church compound, plus all the, I think there were about 12 or 13 priests with them, and they were nuns. They separated the Tutsis and put them on one side, and then they grabbed these bishops, paraded them totally naked with the priests and other religious people who were Hutus, and executed them.
I think
That
for
happened.
purposes, for
Yes,
people
go
who
ahead.
wanted to know the location, that was Gakurazo in Gatarama,
Yes.
according to.
It was a church compound like we would say Kisubi, in Uganda. They paraded them and killed them. Then the Tutsi priests were the ones reporting to RPF where a Hutu priest is hiding or whatever. And they were able to flush them out and kill them. Those who didn't get killed, they were all rounded up and sent to that notorious prison in Gatarama, where many of them have died, and those who have not died yet are still there waiting for their death. Now, we mentioned that in the diocese of Byumba, Byumba is in northern Rwanda, sorry. They rounded up all the Hutu priests, and at that time the Hutu priests were 52 of them. They rounded up 51 of them, executed them. Only one survived. And that priest who survived is now outside the country. And lucky enough, I have met that priest. So I'm not talking about something I read in the papers. I've seen it with my own eyes, touched it with my own fingers. So you can see the evil actions of these killers in Rwanda. I also found out that one of the bishops of Ruhengeri had run away with a whole bunch of his followers into Congo during the first raid of RPF. But later on, he decided to come back because the refugee camp in Congo was repeatedly raided by RPF soldiers who crossed over into Congo for the purpose of exterminating Hutus. He decided to come back thinking that he's going to have peace. That bishop was captured before he even reached his home. He was tortured. They cut off his penis. They cut off his fingers. They cut off many parts of his body, and they forced him to eat them, sarcastically telling him, "You are eating the body of Christ." And we exposed the name of the person who did that torture. The first RPF man who killed the other 4 bishops was called, I think, Major Ibingira. Later on, he became a general. Well, before he became a general, the Catholic Church complained about his gross activities. And they pretended, Paul Kagame went to Rome pretended to apologize, but they kept him somewhere for a little while. After that, they brought him back into the limelight and promoted him to the rank of general. Now, the guy who did the killing of this bishop cut off his private parts and made him to eat his flesh, calling it the body of Christ, is called Nzinza, who happens to be from Uganda. Is one of that group of people near Kabale. So you can see these guys' evil activities. Now, there is another interesting part is the so-called cardinal of Kigali, who our friends in Boston, USA, invited to celebrate the Uganda Martyrs Day last June. He grew up in Luwero as a Mularo, and he was sent to the seminary financed by State House, meaning Museveni. Now, you guys who are running the seminaries in Uganda should watch out. How many of those seminarians you have there who are not indigenous Ugandans and who are being financed by Museveni? This guy was also financed by Museveni. In 1990, before the invasion, they sent him to Kigali and enrolled in the only one seminary in Kigali. The reason they gave was he wanted to go and finish his theology training in Rwanda, while he's also studying French. That was the reason. Kumbe, he was a spy sent by the future RPF. He was ordained a priest in 1990, and RPF invaded in 1991. Now, the minute RPF invaded, he abandoned the parish where he was assigned, ran away, put on a uniform, and started fighting and killing people in northern Rwanda as an RPF soldier. When they won, because they had wiped out all the Hutu priests and the bishops, there was a vacuum. New bishops had to be created immediately. And Kagame had also acquired so much influence that he influenced the choice. This man became a bishop. While he was a bishop, he is known to have declared publicly that we, the Batusi, have no other God but Paulo Kagame, which is not only sacrilegious, but absolutely abominable. You cannot say that as a religious person. Then what the whole purpose of being a priest or a bishop for that matter, and claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, when you have your own God called Paul Kagame? It is also reported that the Catholic Church in Rwanda is very much controlled by Paulo Kagame's regime. For that matter, the element of spirituality is very questionable among those so-called church leaders in Rwanda. It is no wonder that it is now very well known among the people there that all those Tutsi bishops have wives and children, and so are the Tutsi priests, because to them, what is most important is our being Tutsis than our being Christians. If you recall, in one of my first presentations on this UNN news, I told you of a story of a doctor who happens to be my friend, studied in Canada, one of the medical schools, I think University of Montreal, went back to Kigali way back in the 80s and started working in the Kigali hospital as a doctor. as a medical doctor. And one day he was approached by a nun who asked him to have confidential discussion. So he closed the door and she told him that she needed some medical treatment because she was suffering from gonorrhea. Well, you don't get gonorrhea by drinking Nile beer. And then later on, she was able to bring other nuns and the priests, all Batusi, by the way. And they were all suffering from the same diseases. By that time, if you remember, in the 1980s, the only sexual transmitted disease was gonorrhea. We didn't have these other diseases. Maybe, I don't know. But gonorrhea was the only major disease at that time. And she confided in him, telling him that we, the Batusi, when it comes to dealing with each other, don't bring this nonsense of religion. We take care of each other's needs. And religion comes last. And that was their belief. And they still believe that way. So when this new revelation has come out recently, that those Batusi priests and bishops in Rwanda have wives and children, it's no wonder, because that's what they are. Now, the other part of your question was about how this RPF and the cover-up and the disinformation which has spread. This is a very, very complicated area that we are talking about, because you are also looking at what we call neocolonialism. Neocolonialism, as we exposed in that book, The Economic Hitman, neocolonialism identified the Batusi as being a group of people who have no loyalty to any geographic location, who can easily be used as mercenaries, economic mercenaries for that matter, because Africa possesses over 30% of the natural resources found in the whole world. And the Muzungu cannot, as that man in the Economic Hitman said, we cannot allow Africa to industrialize, otherwise we are going to lose our access to their natural resources. And so we shall even have to put up a fight in order to maintain our access to the natural resources of Africa. And as you all know, Congo is at the center of this struggle to control and own Africa's natural resources. So the preparation for this control did not come yesterday. They started it a long time ago. They identified the Batusi, and they have used them literally to take over the Great Lakes region so that they can use this as a springboard for future expansion and the control of the natural resources of this continent. You may have seen how they have used Kagame to, of course, including Museveni, to participate in the Western capitalistic societies' adventures in Somalia, in Ethiopia, in Sudan, and in Chad and elsewhere. How, if you notice, there was a report that Kagame has invested, I don't remember how many, I think it was over $400 million in Congo Brazzaville. Now you see how they are expanding. Which country, Rwanda and Kagame for that matter, investing in Congo Brazzaville? Can you imagine? They are jumping around trying to get control of every area that has deposits of natural resources. Rwanda was the first country to send troops in American-created Darfur crisis way back in the late 90s. Rwanda has and Uganda have troops in Somalia, in Iraq, in Iran, not Iran, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now Rwanda also has troops in Mozambique. You can see, and who are behind this so-called external intervention? It is basically the American government, assisted by the British. The same two countries are the biggest capitalists and exploiters of Africa's resources.
Senior, don't forget the French. The French's relationship with Kagame. Remember, they amended their relationship. Was it this year or last year?
I agree. I know French's involvement, or rather French's control of Francophone Africa is not even a point for debate. It's a given. We know it. But when you are talking about global operation, the most dangerous ones are the Americans and the British. I wish I had remembered. I would pull out a chapter in my new book whereby it is I recorded it. Britain, the number of square miles of land which Britain controls in Africa is several times greater than the size of Britain itself. And these areas are all controlled by British. Now, people should remember, the British don't come as vampires. They come as companies. When we were being colonized, it was the British East Asian Trading Company. You're going to see that everywhere they went, it was a so-called company. Now they are not using company anymore. They are using investors. And any of you who praises the word investors, you don't know what you're talking about. Because now the new word is investors. Foreign investors are coming. We have to kick out all the people from Sango Bay area because an investor is coming to plant palm oil trees. The investors are taking over Luera and digging out the sand. Investors are taking over the Sese Islands. And the word investor, when you hear any of our people proclaiming and glorifying the word investor, I would say, get your hammer and hit them on the damn head, because this is promoting dangerous people. So the so-called neocolonialists or foreign exploiters have thoroughly used the Batusi as their vanguard. They are the ones who are clearing the ground for them, and the Batusi will graze their cattle while the other ones are digging the minerals, which they are doing right now in Congo. And that's why they have closed their eyes on the killing of innocent people in eastern Congo, to the tune of over 12 million people who have been killed. Have you heard any Muzungu complaining about those people? No. And yet they are complaining about a few people compared to this killed in Ukraine by the Russian army. And to them, that is real killing. But when it comes to Congo, they don't give a damn. Because they want those Africans to die so that they can come and dig the minerals.
But before we go into our break, I'd like to give a trigger warning to anyone that's happening, because on this topic, exactly what you have been going through for us is how has this cover up happened, and the what is it called, the public, I forgot, the PR, public relations, that the West has played towards this reactionary group. And prepping them and making it seem like it's the right government to take over. I want maybe for all of us to start to understand that everything that is going on is planned, it is known, but only us are kept in the dark. People who have the ability to rise up against these events or these aspects and actually decide to reconstruct what governance of the African continent can look like, what we want it to be like. So we're gonna play a video before a short break, and this is gonna be, I'm giving a trigger warning, this is gonna be a video of what was the videos that were taken at Gitarama prison and the conditions there. And this is when RPF came back into the country, everyone who was exiled and thrown into that jail. And so that we see the conditions and keep in mind that the West is even, they're the same people who went into this nation, who went into Rwanda to record this and record this as a human rights violation, but did nothing as long as Kagame's regime would deliver what they wanted, which is minerals, resources, and control over African minerals and resources so that they can cut him a small check. So before our short break, the producer will play the video of the conditions at Gitarama prison so that we can visualize and know that these are not things, these things we're talking about. If you actually search on the internet or search books or do research, you can find them. They exist, but they have been hidden from us for a reason, to just sanitize the image of what would become Kagame's Rwanda. As we can see, there is no secret in this world to the suffering of the African people, to the Western world that Africans turn to and ask for help. They know of the suffering of African peoples, they monitor it and enable whoever is participating in the depletion of African people. So we need to keep this in mind as we plan for change, as we plan for a new form of governance, not only for us as Ugandans, but for our region. And when we speak our region, we start Great Lakes and then further beyond, which is the African continent. And Senior Chintu, if you have anything that you would like to add onto that video, I'd invite you to do so at this point in time.
Yes, Desire. The cover up is mostly carried out by the United States government and their agents. They are as much criminals against humanity as Paul Kagame and his Tutsi men. And because they are part of the criminal group, they will do anything to cover up, because if anybody could expose these things or bring them to trial, you cannot leave the United States government out. It's for them, as we say in their own language, they are covering up their own asses. Now, when RPF took over Rwanda, the agenda was to exterminate Hutus. I'm not talking about killing 500, 300, 400. No. Exterminate the Hutus in the same way they exterminated the Red Indians in this country. At that time, and as you know, Kagame and his RPF had no problem, no crumbs in carrying out the order of exterminating a people. From the racial point of view, these are Africans being exterminated. Thank God, let them die, because the less black people on this planet, the better for us. This is the view of most white people, especially those we call the rednecks. Now, at the beginning of the extermination agenda, they were exterminating these people and carrying their dead bodies into Uganda, burying them in mass graves in the area of Higezi and some parts of Ankole. But the reason was, if ever one day something is going to be found out, you cannot pinpoint a mass grave inside Rwanda. Then they found that this is not going to be the permanent solution. They stopped sending dead bodies into mass graves across the border. So United States AID, Agency for International Development, gave them money and equipment, and they built 3 crematoriums in Rwanda, inside Rwanda. I exposed that after having found this information through a British journalist called Gordon, who exposed it, and everyone kept quiet. They were cremating at least 2,000 dead bodies a day. Because after you cremate them, you can spread the ashes in a swamp, and that's it. You know, there is 10 years from now, even 2 years from now, nobody's going to say these ashes are from human bodies or from burnt trees. I don't know if those crematoriums are still operating, but I have not received any information to the contrary. So the crematoriums were built by United States government, or rather agencies. It was from that very reason this woman who just died recently, Madeleine Albright, made a statement some years ago before she died that in spite of killing them, at the rate they are killing them, those Hutus number is increasing because they reproduce like rabbits. So you can see her mental setup that Kagame is not killing them much enough. It is for that very reason why United States government involved. When Kagame took over, William Perry, who was the Secretary of Defense, wrote a letter to Paul Kagame advising him that the presence of Hutu refugees in the Congo is a threat to your future survival as a leader of Rwanda. So do something about these refugee camps of Hutus inside Congo. This is why RPF soldiers have been consistently raiding refugee camps inside Congo, killing them, pretending that they are after people who have attacked Rwanda. To be honest with you, those refugees have not attacked Rwanda. Those refugees are safe. They were living under miserable conditions, but they were refugees in Congo. It is Kagame who has been attacking them. And when they realize that they are being attacked every now and then, they organize themselves for self-defense, which anybody should have done. And whenever they got attacked, they were able to fight back. But they never sent a convoy to penetrate Rwanda and try to shoot Kagame or his people. All this has been a problem, which is supported by United States that go there, exterminate them, because there are many thousands and thousands of Hutu refugees inside Congo. And Kagame plus his friends in Washington are not comfortable knowing that these guys are still there and not dead yet. Now, the ones who were sent in that notorious prison, yes, they were not sent there to be prisoners. They were sent there to die. And many of them are dying. And these pharaohs here in Washington and in London, they know it and they give it an endorsement because they have not done anything. Instead, they have praised Kagame for being such a wonderful man. And you know why he's wonderful? Because he's doing a good job exterminating the Hutus. That is the element behind their praising of him. And they will shower him with anything to make sure that he survives, he continues killing, and by so doing, he's covering their own asses because they are part of the criminal gang which is killing Africans. They are not killing Hutus, they are killing Africans. And we should be aware of that. In the same way, we Ugandans have to be aware that these Museveni, Muhoozi, Tinyefunza, Kayiira gangsters are being maintained, to mention a few, they are being maintained by the same powers, hoping that one day they will gain enough grounds to exterminate us, Ugandans, in the same way Kagame is doing in Rwanda. If you don't believe it, why did he build this Kitalia prison? And who are the people in the Kitalia prison? Our own young men and women. And they are there to die. They are being tortured to death. And it is mind-boggling why any Ugandan cannot see this and continue dancing and singing and having parties and floating on boats, cruises. I know this. And any of you guys watching us who is versed in theology, you would agree with me that the first prayer of human beings before Moses and Isaiah is grief. Grief is the first form of praying. And I don't see that among you people. You are not grieving. And you hear some people, oh, God help us, God help us. God can't help you when you are not even praying to Him. And I'm not talking about praying the rosary or the Quran. No, just simple human grieving. Somebody asked in Uganda, mwabatanyiga mwabachi. You can't even be mad or sorry or what's wrong with you? This is going on. We are talking about Rwanda, but please don't think this is in isolation. We are talking about Uganda as well. I told you, if you look at how these people infiltrated the church and they destroyed it, I am not an authority on church matters, but I don't believe we have a church in Rwanda. If it is led by a cardinal who said that their God is Kagame, if we have priests and nuns who have administered poison to our religious people, like Archbishop Cipriano Rwanga and Bishop Kagwa, retired of Masaka, and you go to the seminaries, start with Nyenga Seminary, go to Bukarasa, go to Katigondo, go to the convents. How many trainees are there who are financed by Kagame? I'm sorry, by Museveni. And how many of those are non-Ugandans? The number of seminarians who are non-Ugandans purporting to be from Ankole or from somewhere else. I think it is 3-4 years ago, we had people who became religious brothers at Kisubi. And I think out of 7, there were some who were identified, or rather they revealed, I am from Ruhengeri in Rwanda. Now I am a brother at Kisubi. I'm from Kabale, pretending to be a Muchiga. But you look at the name, it has nothing to do with being a Muchiga. These are exactly the same type of people as that bishop or that priest or seminarian who went to Rwanda and they became a priest and a bishop and now Cardinal Kambanda. They are sleeping snakes. You go to convents like Bwanda, Gogonya, Nkokonjeru, and check for yourself. How many of them are there that are now sleeping snakes? Pretty soon, they are going to hatch up and you're going to see the poison they can inflict on us. Because Archbishop Cipriano Rwanga was not poisoned by an Acholi or a Musoga, man from the marketplace, by fellow religious people within his compound. How many more of our people do we have to lose in order to wake up? And if we cannot even grieve, this is shameful. This is absolutely shameful to our people, to our religious leaders who are now just taking it lightly. But you wait. Many of our reporters have reported about this Munyarwanda priest who has used his position to sell the church land in Zambia. You all have seen this report. I don't have to repeat his name. Now you are looking at him as a priest Kumbe, you have a snake in the church. And by the way, we have many such snakes. We are not talking about tribalism. We are talking about survival, self-defense, and the integrity of our country, our church as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kintu. And if I can add, just for people to really separate this from the talk on tribalism, you even earlier on talked about the Kakamega group and how many similarities they have amongst the organization of also the Tutsi monarchy and its desire to actually take over and have absolute monarchy. When we talk here, we're talking about reactionary groups, groups that have decided to walk along the path of reactionarism, and they know they can get all the help and support that they need from the West, financially, militarily, and spread propaganda to confuse. That's why the church is in the states that it's in today. Not only the church, in Uganda's case, we've seen it everywhere. In the church, in the mosque, and the introduction of so many other religions that were never there, even in the nation. These all are things to think about. How has our spirituality as a people also been attacked? And that being said, also we then think about how Museveni put an attack on the traditional spiritual practices or practitioners. Sorry, excuse me. But we think about, again, what Senior Chintu has said. This is about survival, integrity, and restoring our dignity as a people. And even if we have to fight our own, to fight off the bigger enemy. But with that being said, we will take a short break. And after this short break, Senior Chintu, we're going to look at now the beef of the show today, the main course meal of the show today, which is we're going to be looking at a video that's going to do some mapping for us of how the Rwandan Patriotic Front moved before the Rwandese genocide and after the Rwandese genocide, both in Rwanda, Burundi, and in the Congo, as reported in the book of In the Praise of Blood. We'll watch that video right after the break. So there's going to be a short break. If you need to take a break in the audience for just a few minutes, not many, and then we'll come back with that video. And then after that, Senior Chintu will break it down for us and match his information with the information in the video so that we can get a better understanding of what now is the new era of, because we've talked about neocolonialism, but we haven't talked about its militancy and the political power that it's given. And what does that mean in our fight to retain back our ancestral lands into a federated state? So we'll take a short break and be back right after the break.
Dr. Andrew Takome Kayiira was born on 30th January 1945 in a small town known as Nkokonjeru in the Buganda region. He is regarded as one of Uganda's forgotten heroes, a true nationalist whose love for his country sent him to an early grave. He was a lawyer and professor and had many accomplishments since 1971, with many of his accolades attained from his education and political experiences, both nationally and internationally. Significant is his doctoral dissertation titled Congoism in Uganda, which has awarded him an internationally recognized terminology now used in criminology. He joined several political organizations, including Uganda Freedom Movement, UFM, which he was the leader, the Uganda National Liberation Front, UNLF, later joining the National Resistance Army, NRA, which had once been his organization's rival. Dr. Kayiira is regarded as one of Uganda's forgotten heroes, a true nationalist whose love for his country led to his premature death. He was just 46 years old when he was assassinated on 6th March 1987 during a dinner with his close friends and 3 female acquaintances. His killers have never been brought to justice.
Why do we need the federal system of governance in Uganda? And what is federalism? Federal is a system of governance. It's not about getting rid of the central government. It's not about party politics. It's not about multi-partisan or absence of it. It's not about religious differences. It's not about tribalism. It is not for the benefit of Buganda alone. It's not about monarchism. It's not about land or dispossessing people from land. It is not about supremacy of one region over another or others. It's about helping the central government to provide services more efficiently and provide more effective development to the people. It's about sharing power and responsibilities between the central government and regional governments. Federalism is about providing more prosperity, more wealth, more feeling of belonging and participation in governance by marginalized and non-marginalized people. The federal system of government minimizes possibilities of waging war against the central government. It minimizes internal acts of terrorism and discontent against the central government. It has inbuilt safeguards that ensure uniform growth for all regions of the country, and additional measures to make sure that the marginalized or less developed regions of the country can catch up through the system of equalization grants and affirmative action programs. This ensures that the regions with greater income and development contribute a percentage of their earnings to the developed areas which may be less developed. It should be noted that federalism, though different from decentralization, does not contradict or exclude decentralization. The two systems can and should coexist and complement each other at the regional level. Advocating federal does not mean or seek to get rid of decentralization from regional tier, nor does it mean getting rid of district MPs, LC leaders, or other regional government officials. To learn more about federalism, register and join UFCC at www.ufcc.uk.
Welcome back from that short break. As I did say before we went into that short break, if you had to do anything, in between the show, to do it, because now we're getting to the most, or one of the most crucial parts of our topic today. Everything has been background, for our understanding. So now we're going to watch a video. It's a bit lengthy, but thankfully it's in English and offers a lot of information that we can take from it. And then when we come back from that video, Senior Kintu will merge his information and the information provided in that video. This is going to be a mapping exercise of how the Rwandan Patriotic Front moved in Rwanda, Burundi, and the Congo before and after the Rwandese genocide. And as we watch this, I want us to think about of how, especially people who have grown up in the 90s, how the Rwandese genocide was retold to us, the propaganda that was spread of it, and it will all be broken down in this video. So we'll watch that video and then we'll come back with our last part of the show. And with that being said, I'll also ask the producer, after we come back, the number will be on the screen. it would be a time for you guys to start preparing any questions or concerns you might have. So let's go into that video, and Senior Chitu, after that video, will come back with the last segment for our show today.
The genocide that took place in Rwanda in 1994 is often characterized as a campaign to annihilate Tutsis only, that the violence was merely Hutu against Tutsi. Yet there is substantive, compelling evidence that around 1 million Hutu civilians were also deliberately and systematically killed by the Rwandan Patriotic Front and its military and intelligence wings before, during, and in the aftermath of the genocide. Testimony from an RPF founder attests that between 1990 and 1994, preceding the genocide against Tutsis, RPF forces systematically killed Hutu in different locations in the north of the eastern province, formerly known as Byumba, and in the northern province, formerly known as Ruhengeri. These massacres took place precisely in Garama, Bisige, Kinyami, Kiyombe, Mukarage, Kivuye, Kiyumba, Kiyungo, Nyamugali, Butaru, Kinigi, Kiyeru, Kidaho, and Humba. The source also confirmed that RPF forces deliberately shelled camps of displaced civilians in Mavumba and Bugoya with mortars, resulting in the death of countless Hutu. Moreover, Hutus who voluntarily tried to join the RPF's military training wings in Gashuru, Gabiro, and Nakivale were systematically killed. A report from the University of Rwanda estimated that 40,000 civilians were executed by the RPF in Byumba and Ruhengeri between 1991 and 1993. The RPF is also alleged to have orchestrated and carried out the assassinations of high-profile Hutu politicians in Kigali and Butare in February 1994. In addition, the RPF is believed to have shot down the presidential plane in Kanombe on the 6th of April 1994, killing 9 political and military officials, including the then Hutu presidents of Rwanda and Burundi. This act triggered the genocide against Tutsis. 3 investigations, the first carried out by Michael Hourigan for the UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda in 1997, the second by the Tribunal's Special Investigations Unit from 1999 until 2003, and the third by French Judge Jean-Louis Bruguière in 2006, all demonstrated that the RPF was responsible for the shooting down of the presidential plane. During the genocide, from April to July 1994, the RPF methodically killed Hutus in the regions under its control, while Tutsis were being systematically exterminated in the zones controlled by the then government forces and militia. In the north of Eastern Province, RPF forces deliberately targeted Hutus, slaughtering an estimated 5,000 Hutu men, women and children inside the Byumba Stadium and at schools in Kibale. 3,000 Hutu civilians were killed by RPF soldiers in Karambi Trading Center, and many more in Kagitumba, Nyagatare, Gituza, Ruata, Muhura, Giti, Rutare, Gabiro, Kisaro, and Marumbi. Those who were wounded or attempted to run were chased and executed with traditional hand weapons. Witnesses estimated that many thousands of bodies were burned and incinerated in Rwanda's Akagera National Park. At the height of the genocide in May 1994, a UN cable revealed that RPF forces were slaughtering Hutu and dumping the bodies in the Kagera River. Systematic killings of Hutus intensified as RPF forces progressively seized new territory. Having conquered the south of Eastern Province, formerly known as Kibungu, RPF soldiers executed approximately 2,000 Hutus in Rumanagana and others in Gahani, Kigarama, Rusumo, Narsho, and Sake. As RPF forces advanced towards the capital Kigali, they continued hunting and killing Hutus throughout the regions in eastern and northern provinces formerly part of Greater Kigali, such as Gashora, Bichumbi, Kabuga, Gikoro, and Gikomero, where close to 9,700 Hutus were killed. Once they seized Kigali city, RPF forces exterminated an estimated 3,000 Hutus in Ndera and hundreds in Kanombe. An unknown number of prominent Hutus who resided in the Remera neighborhood were killed by the RPF's armed wing in the immediate aftermath of the downing of the plane. Other RPF killing zones included Kachiro, Kimironho, Masaka, Nyachonga, and Kikochiro. In southern province, formerly known as Gitarama, close to 3,000 people were killed by the RPF's 59th Battalion in a refugee camp in Rambura. A Human Rights Watch report affirmed that RPF forces massacred unarmed civilians, many of them women and children, who had assembled on their orders in Nihazo, Mukingi, and Runda. Further executions of Hutus were witnessed in Kabgayi, Gakurazo, and Mugina. A Rwandan human rights activist and journalist named Andre Siwamana compiled lists of 18,000 people slaughtered in Gitarama after the RPF seized that prefecture in June 1994. These lists have been in the possession of the United Nations since July 1996. The RPF's killing of Hutus is irrefutable. A UN feasibility review on Rwandan refugees returning to their homes after the genocide in August 1994 concluded that 40,000 Hutus were systematically slaughtered in fewer than one-third of the country's communes visited, and the killings were believed to amount to genocide. In addition, an incomplete investigation submitted to the UN tribunal by a political group of Rwandan Hutu refugees in 2000 had established that 20,000 civilians were killed by the RPF in the northern part of Rwanda between 1990 and 1994. After the RPF's victory and the end of the genocide against Tutsis in July 1994, the systematic slaughter of Hutu civilians did not stop. Testimonies from defectors assert that Hutu men from all over Rwanda were being lured into RPF military ranks and transported to Akagera National Park in the Nyungwe forest, as well as Gabiro and Masaka, where they were executed. It is estimated that hundreds of thousands of Hutus perished in these schemes. In April 1995, in front of UN peacekeepers, the unthinkable happened. RPF forces unleashed machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades on a displacement camp in Kibeho, resulting in the deaths of approximately 4,000 Hutu men, women, and children. In 1996, RPF forces invaded Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, formerly known as Zaire, where more than 1 million Hutus had sought refuge from the violence in 1994. The RPF's army attacked and dismantled the camps and hunted down Hutu refugees from North and South Kivu provinces throughout the dense Congolese jungle in Maniema, Orientale, and Equateur provinces, killing hundreds of thousands of unarmed men, women, and children. In 2010, the UN concluded Rwandan Patriotic Army may have committed genocide against Rwandan and Congolese Hutus in DRC. Whilst the Rwandan Patriotic Army was hunting and killing Hutu refugees in DRC, it was also slaughtering Hutus at home, under the guise of fighting insurgents in 1997. In the Western Province, formerly known as Gisenyi, Amnesty International confirmed that RPF security killed several hundred civilians at the Mahoko market and used grenades and machine guns to kill 8,000 other Hutu civilians in the caves in Kanama. RPF forces committed similar crimes in Mukamira, Biyahi, Mudende, Rawehe, Gachie, Gasiki, and Kabaya. Countless Hutus from the northern province, formerly known as Ruhengeri, were also exterminated in the counterinsurgency campaign by RPF forces in Musanze, Kigumbe, Nyakinama, Ruhundu, Chabingo, Beginyo, Nyamutara, Vunga, and Undusu. The death toll of Hutus killed by the RPF forces across Rwanda before, during, and in the aftermath of the genocide against Tutsis is hard to establish. A former member of the RPF military intelligence operating in Ruhengeri estimated his unit alone killed 100,000 people between May 1993 and August 1994. Judy Raver, an investigative journalist who spent close to 20 years researching the crimes committed by the RPF, estimated that around 1 million Hutus were killed by RPF forces in 1994, and in subsequent years in Rwanda. She has argued that the RPF committed genocide against the Hutus. The former head of the RPF's political secretariat also accuses his former colleagues of committing genocide against Hutus. Teozen Rudasingwa said approximately 1 million Hutu civilians died from 1994 onwards in Rwanda. Despite the RPF and its army's legacy of violence, none of its senior-ranking officers has ever been prosecuted for war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide by an independent international court. The impunity and victors' justice have only fueled the violence in the Great Lakes region and undermined ethnic reconciliation in Rwanda. The RPF's record remains largely hidden, nearly 2.5 decades after seizing power. It went to great lengths to cover up its crimes in areas it controlled in 1994 and used propaganda and terror to consolidate power in the aftermath of the genocide.
Welcome back from that video. And I just wanted to say right after that, as we talk about all this and discuss it today, may we center that this is within, these events have happened because of the massacre, the killing, the violence that has been unleashed on a people's, the total annihilation of a people, almost an ethnic cleansing by targeting and killing out people of a certain group to attain power, and the cover up and that has happened has not been done by RPF only themselves, but has been aided and abated by its counterparts, which is the Western players that control all these international courts, that control who gets to be the villain and who's not the villain, And in this case, since one of the leading generals in the RPF themselves happens to be even President Kagame of Rwanda, aided and abetted by now Museveni, who is playing or pretending or illegally has captured the nation that is under the name of Uganda. There are people who have enabled this and aided this and participated fully and wholeheartedly to carry out their plan to attain power. And this power is to have the access to resources to be able to bargain with the Western powers to enrich themselves off of the bloodshed of our peoples in that region. With that being said, Senior Kintu, with this video goes much into detail of what happened even before the genocide. So we start to see that the idea that the Rwandan Patriotic Front was something that was formed after the genocide to protect or lead to a reformation or the birth of the new nation, Rwanda itself starts to be a lie, because this is something that happened before the genocide. They were active during the genocide and then continued to kill even after the genocide. And this is the other part of the Rwandese genocide that is not talked about a lot, which is the killing of Hutus, the targeted killing of Hutus. And this is not to disregard that there was also the targeted killing of the Tutsis, but the side of the Hutus has not been publicized or mediatized as much as we've seen the Tutsis side that has been spread, mediatized, and has ceremonies every year to acknowledge the Rwandese genocide. But we've never heard about the Hutu side, which even goes further after the genocide, going into refugee camps and killing people within refugee camps. And today, there is an idea that there is a continued manhunt for this, since no one has been held accountable. I just wanted you to merge your knowledge with this knowledge that you have attained today. For so many of us, this information is new information per se.
That video is very heartbreaking. And based on that video, plus what I already know, I would not want to use the word genocide against the Tutsis. That is not true. That is the first part of an internationally orchestrated lie. It is genocide against the Hutus, period. It was not the Tutsis who suffered genocide. Seeing that video has reminded me when I was in Rwanda in 1993, before the RPF took over. I traveled from Rwanda and drove through, I passed by Ruhengeri and went to Gishenyi and came back to Kigali. Now, during that, this is 1993, before RPF took over. In Ruhengeri, there was a football stadium built by a very wealthy local man called Kabuga. The RPF came down the mountains and they took over that territory. Then they started enforcing their new system, which was something like a muchaka muchaka. They rounded up all the local people, but we don't know how many they were. And they filled up that stadium for the purpose of giving them instructions as to what the new Rwanda is going to be like and how it is going to be governed. So the poor local people, men, women, and children, came. They stood there in the stadium, and after a few speeches by some army commanders who had already planted strategically around the stadium, their RPF men with machine guns, and at the sound of the whistle, they started mowing down everybody who was in the stadium. All of them were killed. But lucky enough, there were 2 or 3 who managed to jump the fence and run away. And one of those men who ran away is here in the state of Virginia. He gave us an account. When he said that, I said, I remember, because I heard of the story and I saw some pictures of the dead bodies. But this is RPF execution of Hutu population for the purpose, as I said, of wiping out these people. The way the Americans are proud of having wiped out 100% of the Red Indians in the present-day state of Florida. So you can see who is helping who. These Muzungu are helping the RPF to wipe out the black population, the Bantu people of this region. Why? Why are these white people supporting and pumping Kagame and M7 as well to kill our people? Because they want to control the continent. They are out for our natural resources. And for them, we black people don't matter. That is something which should be in the head of every black person. Even if you are a Tutsi, you do not matter. They are now using you to do the dirty job, but just around the corner, they are going to turn against you as well and wipe you out. So the point is extermination of black people, take over the continent, utilize our natural resources, and enrich themselves. Now, earlier on, I mentioned to you about the British control. Let me just read to you these few sentences so that you can understand. Tanzania's gold, Zambia's copper, South Africa's platinum, and the coal and Botswana's diamonds are all dominated by British companies. They have mines and the mineral rights in 37 African countries and control a vast area of Africa's land. That area is at a staggering number of 1.03 million square kilometers on the continent. This is over 4 times the size of UK. And they still want to control more. How are they going to achieve it? By using African hooligans like Kagame and Museveni to expand their control over the continent. Imagine, this is only about Britain, by the way. We're not talking about the United States, France, or China. No, only Britain. They control a territory which is full of minerals, which is 4 times greater than the size of United Kingdom. If you cannot be appalled by this, I don't know what else I can say to you. And this is only Britain. I have not talked about the United States or France. And they are controlling that much land. And we are not talking about the swamps, but area which has minerals. So you can see why, for them, it is a blessing to have hooligans like Museveni and Kagame, because they are using this. There was one other white man, I think it was an American. He said, when these Africans gained independence, we were worried that we may lose access to their resources. But for some reason, thank God, we found a way of planting African bastards into positions of power so that they can do the dirty work for us of maintaining access to their resources for virtually zero price. It is no wonder that after we got independence, there was a period of coups after coups, so that the whole concept of democratic governance patriotic and nationalistic politics in Africa disappear. And indeed they did. Then we get military hooligans who were being trained in overseas military academies, be it Sandhurst or the French Legionnaires or American, what is it called, where Kagame went to school in Leavenworth, whatever the name is, in Arkansas. And yeah, now, if you look at the African continent, how many leaders do we have who have been directly elected by their people, independent of the influence of the Western capitalist countries? You can't easily find one. When we got one, they kill him. That young man in Burkina Faso, this man in Tanzania, Pombe Magufuli, what else can I say? Now we have people who are nothing but the puppets of these exploiters. This is something that is killing the continent, and we Africans are going to die because we have failed to understand that we have dangerous lions around the kraal who are using our own people, like Museveni and Kagame. What we have shown in this program today, if that kind of a prison was in Russia, these Western imperialists would be screaming murder that Russia is doing this to innocent people. But since it is being done to Africans by their own bastard like Kagame, they are praising him, calling him the best man on the African continent. They are rewarding him even with the chairmanship of the British Commonwealth, which he doesn't even deserve because he has never been culturally, he has never been a part of the so-called British colonial culture. No. But you can see why they are building up all these things. It is them who are now disturbing Congo. When the Congolese had elections, they elected a leader from Bandundu. What is his name? Anyway, you know who it is. But they made sure that they promote and plant someone whom they knew was inept. And I want to quote a statement from his late father, who confided in some people around him. I'm talking about the old secretary who is now dead. He said, "I know my son. He's such an idiot, I can't even trust him to be a driver." But these Americans, using Kagame and Museveni, manipulated the elections that Fayulu, who had won the elections, doesn't become president, but they bring this idiot who only got 23%, I think it was 23 or 24% of the votes, as opposed to Fayulu, who got about 64%. And look at what is going on now. Signing a pact with Museveni that he is coming, Museveni should bring troops to help him fight against ADF rebels. ADF which doesn't even exist. By the way, talk about ADF. We have two ADFs. The old ADF, which was predominantly Ugandans and Muslim, and the new ADF, which was bought by Kagame. We exposed this not too long ago. I knew the old ADF. I met with all their executive leaders. during a consultation when they invited me some years ago. I have been with all those old ADF here in the United States because they had a camp here, in Nairobi, in Dar es Salaam, in Lubumbashi, in Kinshasa. They were decent Ugandans dedicated to one thing, to overthrow Museveni, which any Ugandan would support. Because Museveni has to be overthrown militarily, not by voting. Talking about vote, you are just dreaming. They should give you another blanket and sleep comfortably. They were not the type that could do these atrocities until they sold the name ADF to Kagame. And Kagame turned around and used the name ADF with his own Tutsi killers who have raided this territory, killing innocent people so that they can open up the country for these foreign exploiters to come and dig the minerals, and for him and his tribesmen to bring new Tutsis to take over that region of Congo and graze their cattle. Then, when these new ADF, commanded by Kagame, do the atrocities, Museveni and his Western supporters clamorously tell the whole world that it is these Muslim ADF rebels who are killing innocent people in this region. So Museveni sends troops in there. And Tshisekedi is stupid enough not to understand this. And he signs a pact that, yes, you should come and help me. When the UPDF goes there, they are going there to reinforce the new ADF in killing innocent people so that the Mzungu can come and dig the minerals out of this area. And Kagame, from his end, sends troops in Congo, claiming that he's going to fend off the Hutu rebels in the refugee camps who are a threat to his regime. Now, the Hutu rebels are not a threat to his regime because he is the one who is invading, and he has done it and exterminated so many innocent people in the refugee camps in Congo. And as I said last Thursday, that they had a meeting which was attended by the foreign minister of Congo, representative from the AU, representative from the World Bank, representative from the European Union, representative from the UN military force, which was sent there to keep peace, which it has never done. And the Hutu refugees demanded one thing: we want to go back to our country. We are not here to fight anybody. We have the guns, yes, but we needed these guns to defend ourselves whenever you, RPF, raided us. And in that meeting too, there was the chief of intelligence from Kigali. But again, Kagame refused to give them what they demanded. Instead, he sent more RPF guys to kill these Hutus because he found out there are still many. They are not dead enough yet. So you can understand the dynamics. And what is so surprising is that the Americans and the British know all this crap and they don't do anything about it because they are behind it. They are the ones who are pushing it. And they are the ones giving him the arms. They are the ones financing it. They are the ones giving him intelligence and logistic support and the propaganda. So we have a larger problem than simply Kagame and Museveni. This is what we as Ugandans, as Africans from this Great Lakes region must be fully aware of. We have a larger problem than this. Now, ever since UPDF went into Ituri area, have they brought to you anybody they claim to be an ADF rebel? Because there is no, the people they run, they have locked horns with in order to kill the innocent people are their own people from Rwanda under the name of ADF. And the M23 are also Tutsis from Kagame's group, killing innocent people, but more specifically, focusing on exterminating Hutus who are inside the Congo. So we have a very, very big problem in the region, and we have to handle it as a team. By that I mean Congolese, Rwandese, and Ugandans. That is indigenous people of those countries. Because we are dying. Our people are being killed. And this is not an isolated issue. It is spilling over slowly but gradually. How many of our people in Uganda have been killed by these Tutsis? In Karamoja, you've seen it. In Acholi, you've seen it. In Buganda, you've seen it. Go to areas like Mubende, they are all now speaking Kinyarwanda because the indigenous Ugandans in Mubende area are now a small fraction. You go to counties like Maogola, Kabura, the number of indigenous people is diminishing very rapidly. So what we are talking about with respect to Rwanda is not an isolated case. It is happening to Ugandans, maybe at 20 miles per hour speed, but sooner it is going to be hit 50 miles per hour speed. And you will have nobody to cry to because you have been so damn silent, dancing charenga every bloody day. When I see Ugandans not addressing these issues of this extermination of our people, and they waste time talking about Manchester United or dancing charenga or going to the beaches or having fabulous weddings, sometimes marrying even these Badehemuka women. I don't understand you people. What's wrong with you? And the only institutions we have in Uganda today that we could bank on are the religious organizations. But we have a problem in the religious camp because some of our religious leaders have been compromised. Others are busy grabbing money at night from Museveni. And others pretend that they don't belong to this world, yet they are supposed to be preaching the gospel to this world. We have a problem, my fellow Ugandans. But we have to wake up because this is not a joke.
Thank you so much for that, Senior Kintu. And before we go into voice notes and phone calls, you really illustrated that there is a bigger enemy at bear, and we would argue not only for the Great Lakes region, but for the whole African continent. And this enemy has become emboldened. I'm going to ask the producer to play a video, and this is going to be a video recently. This was a statement that was made 2 weeks ago, and this was a statement from John Bolton, who served during President Donald Trump's presidency. This has nothing to do with that, but to just show you how the state house works and their policy towards other nations, especially third world nations. And for us to understand, Mr. Senior Chintu talked about how they plant leaders and they help in coup d'etats. And what happened in Rwanda was, we cannot ignore that that in it of itself was a coup d'etat. Museveni came into power via coup d'etat as well. These are leaders who have been planted via military action that is supported and backed by not only their weapons but their money afterwards, so that they can then sustain a regime for themselves. And this is John Bolton admitting that they have played a role in several coup d'etats. Why are we showing you this video? Ndoza kino ngenda kyogera mu Luganda. Tebatubalamu magezi, to the point that now they can come out in public and actually admit to these things because they expect you to do nothing. So omuntu waba akulabye ng'omusiru, take offense to that. Take offense to that. And when you do take offense to that, let's start planning and strategizing, because at the end of the day, they expect us to lay low and die lying low. So we must take offense to that. But not only take offense to that, but use, especially Senior Chim talked about, first we must have grief. Use that anger to build up something in you so that we actually start to organize for our own liberation, because we cannot accept to actually lay low and die, because that's what's expected by them admitting this in public. So can the producer please play that video before we go into today's messages?
It's Donald Trump looking out for Donald Trump. It's a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence.
I don't know that I agree with you. To be fair, with all due respect, one doesn't have to be brilliant to attempt a coup.
I disagree with that. As somebody who has helped plan coup d'etat, not here, but other places, it takes a lot of work, and that's not what he did. It was just stumbling around from one idea to another. Ultimately, he did unleash the rioters at the Capitol. As to that, there's no doubt. But not to overthrow the Constitution, to buy more time to throw the matter back to the states to try and redo the issue. And if you don't believe that, you're going to overreact. And I think that's a real risk for the committee, which has done a lot of good work, mostly when the witnesses testify, not when the members are opining.
Hopefully, he said, as someone who has planned coup d'etats, it's not easy. They take pride in this, and it's done in our faces.
It is good to hear that man say that on his record, or rather his resume, he has planned coups in other places. And you remember, there is another statement by, I think it was a woman, who said, Museveni or Uganda is our African regional, or rather contact center for African influence, as Colombia in Latin America and Israel in the Middle East. So you can see they have their strategic planning, that they have people they plant there and they use them to do the dirty work. He has staged coups. That leads me to the question, who may have participated in the death of Magufuli in Tanzania? There are many unanswered questions about his death, but that is something we have to look at. Who was offended by the presence of Magufuli? That's the first question. Who was gaining from Magufuli's presence? It is the Tanzanian people, not these Muzungus. So you can see where his death could have come from. Definitely everybody with a brain as small as mine will understand that Magufuli didn't die of natural death. He was killed. So is this man of Burkina Faso and many others. And who is responsible for the ascendance to power of the pumpkin in Kinshasa? It is these people. They will not allow a person with the brilliance and the commitment to his nation to survive in that country. That's why they killed Lumumba. That's why they killed, or they overthrew, Kwame Nkrumah. So we can go on and on and on. In Kenya, of course, Tom Mboya was killed. There are so many other important characters there who were wiped out by these people. But right now, our greatest threat to the African continent is the presence of AFRICOM. That's our greatest threat.
Yeah.
Who was being used to stir up the troubles in Tigray recently in Ethiopia? It was Museveni and his idiot son. So you can see how they are using these people, local hooligans, to carry out their agenda.
Senior Chintu, if I can just chip in there a little bit for people to understand how this propaganda plays. AFRICOM, if you're new here and you don't know AFRICOM, AFRICOM is just American military on the African continent. And they have about 37 countries that participate in this and have over 50 military bases on the African continent. They fund them, they give them weaponry, but that is just background. I think my point that I would like to add is AFRICOM and the people who were actually igniting the fire in the Tigray region participating, you have Muhoozi and his father. But then on the other hand, in order to confuse you as the masses, here was the International Criminal Court telling you that they are going to look into Muhoozi for the Kasese massacre. Those two things contradict each other and don't make sense. Do not bet your life in the hands of these people because they are your demise. The sooner you understand that, the more direct and organized you can move towards your own liberation. They shall not arrest anyone who is bringing them what they need. Claiming that I remember so many Ugandans celebrated on the timeline. International Criminal Court is going to open up a case on Muhoozi. They're going to revise Muhoozi. But Muhoozi plays a big role in Africa, especially in the Great Lakes region. SFC did not come out of thin air. And Muhoozi always talks blatantly on his Twitter about the military power he has behind him. He's not talking about our UPDF. He's not talking about our Askaris. He's not talking about our Askaris. Understand, these people are given military weapons. These drones you see bombing in Syria and all the way in the Middle East, those are made on the African continent because they know those companies if they build those industries on the African continent, first of all, tax break, less questions, and they have the access to raw materials to make them cheaply. And you go buy a drone to take pictures, whereas they are making thousands of drones and they equip them with guns and they're killing people in Afghanistan, in Syria, and even on our own continent in Somalia. The sooner you understand who the enemy is and how the enemy is moving, what they say, omusoto gukuba ku mutwe. And if you can't find the head of the snake, you will be strangled by its tail. And right now the tail is strangling us. But that was it, Senior Chintu, you were saying.
You have put it straight. I can't add on anymore.
With that being said, we're now going to take this next segment to actually listen to your contributions, answer any questions you might have. And with that being said, we will listen to our first participant, and this is coming from, the number is on the screen. Please do make if you don't have the number is on the screen. Send your messages in right now. We're going to actually take time out and listen to them. First, this message, Senior Chintu, is coming from Brother Malik in the UK, so I'll play this one.
Our Desire, thanks for hosting the show and bringing our elder, senior, Mr. Kintu on UNN. Yeah, it's not the first time we have talked about this, that those people don't believe in any form of religion whatsoever. Because I think you've heard this talk that's going around, Museveni is our God, Kagame is our God. But where is this coming from? Then we have to look at their lineage, the indoctrination that was put into them by their ancestors. And check this out.
All Rwandans know that the Herod founder of the Nigenya dynasty declared himself to have come down from heaven. Heaven. This myth was propagated throughout the entire society in order to differentiate himself from the common mortals. Okay, now let's go in the Bible and let's look at Revelations and let's see what it says. Revelations chapter 12, verse 7. War breaks out in heaven and Satan is thrown down by the archangels Michael and his allies. The great conflict occurs after Messiah is taken up to God's throne. It was understood that Satan once was able to make accusations against the people before God in Jacob chapter 1 verse 6. But after Christ's death, resurrection and ascension, Satan has been bared from the heavenly throne room. Moreover, the vision shows that Satan lashes out on the earth because he's angry at having lost out in heaven. Satan is like a caged animal who tries to do as much damage as possible in the space he has available. Evil is present and active on earth, but is not all powerful. Abantu baneno abatuusi olulimi lwabwe oba where they're from bagamba nti bo baava mu ggulu, naye we tusoma ekitabo ekitukuvu Bayibuli mu Revelations, abantu abaava mu ggulu yali Sitaani, Katonda gwe yakwata n'amukasuka wansi. Ebikolwa bye yali akola kubanga ne Katonda yamulema. We tutunuulira abantu leero who fit the description kubanga it's even deeper than what you think. Sitaani gwe bakwata ne bakasuka wansi from heaven y'omuntu atalina a homeland. Abatuusi tebalina a homeland. Doza muze mwebuuza ku lwaki abatuusi balina empisa buli embize mumanyi okutta obulogo obulimba lwakubanga ansa bazibawadde baava mu ggulu. There you go. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Brother Malik. And if you would like to add to that, Senior Chichi, please feel free to do so.
Well, I agree with Brother Malik. The only thing I can add on is that he has opened my eyes. I think I certainly agree with Brother Malik and what the Tutsis have been saying, that they came from heaven. Yes, if they really came from heaven, then they are the devil that was thrown out of heaven onto earth. And unfortunately, they didn't land in Australia. They landed in our Great Lakes region. Now we are paying the price of their intrusion in our region. To add on his point, if you look at, I'm not a good mathematician, but I believe in statistics. If you look at the statistics, we have, those of you who are learned, we have what we call empirical evidence. Empirical evidence in statistics is you take things, for example, if it rains in January and rains in February, and then it rains in March, and in April, May, June, you have 100 degrees temperature, then in August, you can make an empirical evidence that January, February, March, those are months of rain. And the other 3 months are months of a dry season. And, because the evidence is there, you have taken it day by day, month by month. Empirical evidence tells me, look at what their activities have been. They have not contributed anything that I would call constructive. If you look at Uganda alone, they found us with an infrastructure that was working. They found us with a medical system that was working. They found us with an educational system which was the envy of the region. They found us with an economic system and a cooperative system and a vibrant, growing industrial structure. And what did they do to them? They destroyed them. Everything. They found us with a culture and the cultural institutions and the places of antiquity. They destroyed them. They found us with good family and the marital systems and the norms and the cultures. What have they done? They have infiltrated them. Impose, when we were getting married, in our norms, you had to ask a question: the girl I'm going to marry, or the girl my son wants to marry, which clan does she belong to? If we are not sure of the clan, that was a big question mark and could stop the whole process of courtship. Now they have destroyed that. And I hear that they are even trying to teach people that you can marry a woman of your own clan as long as she's not directly from your own family, which is bullshit. They have infiltrated our churches. I am not that old, but I remember when I was growing up, we had organized churches. We had the Catholic Church, we had the Anglican Church, we had the Orthodox Church, and we had the Muslims. And in some cases, all these churches are very well spread within our families. Now they come up with this something called Pastor Gundi, Pastor so and so, hanging around and starting, preaching the so-called gospel, which they don't understand. And now they have become the norm. We even know Museveni's daughter is one of the so-called pastors. We didn't have that vocabulary. Oh, by the way, I've forgotten the Seventh-day Adventist. Yeah, those were the churches. But now we have this pastor so and so, pastor so and so. Now, if you look at the so-called pastors, how many of them are carrying Baganda names and they are not even Baganda? And you know what is so interesting? They are using the word pastor, pastor Gundi, pastor, whatever they call themselves, and they have made a lot of money and they are being guarded by military. When I was growing up, Bishop Chiwanuka was never guarded by police officers or military officers, but these so-called pastors have a military escort. Yet, because this is their plan, they do not have those pastors in Rwanda today under Kagame. They use them in Uganda to suffocate and destroy our true church institutions. And you're going to find those Bidangadi pastors with a multitude of followers because there are so many people who are frustrated or confused. You see, these devils that came in from heaven, as Brother Malik says, yes, these are devils because all they know is to destroy. They have not built anything. Destroy, destroy, destroy. So we have to be watchful of these devils that were thrown out of heaven, as they claim, to come here and destroy what we have.
And so we're still, if you're there and you have any questions that you would like for us to answer, please go ahead and send them. But before I play our next or read out our next message, I would like to say like this as we go on. I and Senior Kintu have been here every Sunday And I would like to illustrate this, or to stress this, not even illustrate, to stress this. When we come here, we don't come here to talk of, we come here to talk of power dynamics specifically. We're talking about power dynamics and how we can understand them to then gain back the power into our hands. So all this talk of this person versus this person, or I don't like how these people who are ethnically like this treat themselves, that is not the conversation that is being had here. We're talking about how power has been taken from us, how power has been used to intimidate, terrorize, and even even violently take out, kill people, millions and millions. How many people died in Luwero? How many people have died in Acholi? How many people are dying right now in Karamoja? With how many people have missed out on a life because of that education system? That was one announcement Museveni did, Bonaba Some, and it has destroyed a generation of people. Right now, all our people being thrown out of the nation to go and actually work in substitute in the Middle East. So when we come here, we don't come here to pinpoint or to facilitate a discussion amongst yourselves for you to find the chest to start speaking about how you don't like how these ethnically organized people behave like this and you don't like what they do. We come here with evidence, background to really talk about power dynamics in our region and how we can actually make sure that we get the power back and start to facilitate governance, not only in our region, but for the envisioning of the continent. That's all I want to say for people in the comment section and people who are commenting on the topic and how the message is spread so that this is put on record. Because a lot of people see this as a window to start saying things like, oh, I don't like how the Somalis act. Oh, I don't like how this group. No, that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about people's character as they're ethnically organized. We're talking about power dynamics and how power is organized right now, currently in Uganda and on a further note, the Great Lakes region, and why they're forcing us into an East African Union so that the conversation never gets watered down to just mediocre small things. With that being said, we'll move on to our next voice note submission too. And this is from Chionga Habat. No, sorry, I said that wrong. This is from Chigonya Habat. My apologies.
Bannange mbalamusiza nnyo ku the Tower y'olwaleero. Olwaleero nkwatiddwa omukisa okugibeererako ddala weetandikidde paka weetuuse. Naye mbeebaza munnange Nakawuka Desire presenter nkwebaza olw'omulimu omulungi gw'okola. Njagadde njogere ddala mu Luganda lwentegeera obulungi. Mukulu Remigius nze kimanye nti ndi musomi wo gamba ndi muyizi wo nti okuva ku programu eno gye waliko nga bakuintroducinga nga gundi nga kwanjula omulangira Kimbugwe programu zize nziddamu naye recently nabadde ku programu yo ennyonnyola abatuusi abo ne bigendererwa ku gundi confinant yaabwe gye baakolera mu 1992 erwakitula. Nze nali simanyi nti gwe wakiwandiika naye bwe ndaba nti gwe wawandiika ekintu ekyo nkussaamu ekitiibwa kingi kubanga nasoma akantu ako nkasomye ebbanga nze Kayiira kange era ne programu y'olwaleero eno nayo ngitutte ng'akalira. Omuntu yenna alina amagezi awulire. Tetukyalina kati kye tujja kuleka kubikkirira kubanga naffe tukalubye emitima kaakati tebajja kututiisatiisa nga nammwe omukalubye ku Remigius nga nammwe omukalubye omutima kola nti abantu bano tubaatuukiriza bagamba nti ow'ebbango bw'otamuwemukira teweebikka. Naffe tujja bawemukira ddala kubanga programu etulaga bana njagadde okaba amaziga nga tunulira ebintu byonna ebihappeninga mu region, the Great Lakes region, ku maapu eri gye batulaze. Omulimu gw'omukoze research gye mukoze ebaweesa ekitiibwa bannange. era temujjango okufa abaagala okuyiga abatono katubeere nga tunaaba abatono katubeere nga tunaife abaagala okutegeera kubanga bw'oba tosobodde kufuna ddagala tuufu ku bulwadde obukuluma obulwadde bujja kuwona naye kati muntu wa ddagala tutegeera omuntu yenna alina amagezi kati alina okuyigira ku kintu nti lwaki mumala ebiseera byammwe lwaki mwewaayo ne mujja okutuyigiriza mujja kutuyigiriza tusobole okufuna ki okutegeera obulwadde obutuluma bulwadde ki kati tujja kutunda buli ketulina konna nzera buli kennina akali e Uganda nga tunda nsobola okukola ki okulaba nti mba nekyembaako tulwane tulibizaawo buzza kubanga kusaawo eno abantu bano olabira ddala nga bannaffe bano betutuddeko bano abatuli wano wetuli be bannannyini kututuusaako bino byonna bino abo Museveni talina magezi n'akamu n'abo gurupu tebalina magezi n'akamu bano abazungu bennyini bano be batubonyaabonya naye omuntu atayagala kuwuliriza bintu bino nze neewuunya omuntu ayagala okubeera kuwolokoso omuntu ayagala okuwuliriza pokopoko atafuddeeyo okufuna bwino gwe mututte ebbanga lyemutuwadde okunoonyereza kumunoonyereza bannaye mukulu w'emigyasi nze nkugirako enkufiira nkwebaza nnyo ne muwala muto Desire bannaye weebala omulimu gw'okola kulanga otubeererawo ebintu bingi ebihappenings mbimanyi bulungi ebivudde mabegaawo naye ogumiddeko era ogumiddewo mwebale ddala bannaye nzi ako kalira kange sigenda gijjako nina archive omuli video zonna video clips zonna ezizanyibwa okuvida UNN lwe yatandika naye neno njagimakinga samwe njagiwa ebifo bya mirundi ebiri nti ekimu weeba ebuze nsigaze nga ninawo endala eya reserve ate kumira mpeera abankumire
Message and
Thank you.
Kintu.
Well, I thank him for that comment. Sorry, many people who don't understand Uganda didn't pick it up, but he was just expressing his great thanks for the work well done and what we have done to expose the evil plans which are destroying our countries, especially in the Great Lakes region, and who are responsible for this destruction. So, and I hope the only thing I can say to him is, let me quote the Bible. A so-called land gentleman asked Jesus, what can he do to enter heaven? And Jesus said, what are the laws of Moses? And the man said, I know all of them. He said, okay, now if you know all of them, go sell what you have and follow me. That is where it ended. And the man could not agree to sell what he has. But this gentleman who was called, he said, I'm going to sell everything. And I say, bravo, bravo, brother. That's what we need. We need people who have learned and understood and agreed to sell everything and join the struggle so that we can liberate our country and the Great Lakes region, because we are in trouble and we need serious individual and communal participation in this struggle. And not dancing, not going to the beaches, not singing, not drinking, not having a good time, because this is a time for struggle.
For our next message, this is coming from Joe in the UK. And Joe goes on to say, Desire and senior religious, I cannot thank you enough, but we'll just add this. The Bible says, and then open quote, open rebuke is better than secret love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. And this is from Proverbs chapter 27, verses 5 to 7. Keep up your excellent work. God bless. Thank you, Joe, for this message. And if you would like to add on to that, Senior Kintu, please feel free to do so.
I can add on one word, amen.
Well, wow. And if there isn't any more messages from the producer, we will take this opportunity I'm guessing there is more messages from the producer. So as we wait for those messages to come in, there was another video, Senior Chintu, that I think got lost in our archives, but there is actually a video of these are Hutu refugees in Burundi, because let us not forget that the refugees spread all the way from Congo, Tanzania, Burundi, and some in Uganda and in Burundi, and it was to what you've been talking about. I really wanted our audience members to be able to see this because it's a testimony from a Hutu woman or mother who was just at home in a refugee camp. They've now settled and gotten permanent settlements, but RPF members raided that area and actually took out their agenda is firstly to kill the husband and the older sons. So they killed her husband and older sons, and in her testimony was testifying how I'm gonna make sure that at least we see that video before today's program ends. Kubanga, you know, you never know. People will say I'm getting this out of thin air, but just to give background and to and so they killed her husband and her sons. But on top of that, the next segment of the interview was a gentleman who was talking about the methods of torture. And this reminded me about Uganda. Because from so many people tortured in Kitaria, we've seen the videos online. People who pieces of meat were chopped out of fleshes from their skin were chopped off. This is the same thing that the gentleman in the video went through. We've become so numb to even this violence, we retell it as though it's not hurtful because it happens so regularly and has been normalized by the violence or the rampage that these people have been on for all this time. But with that being said, I'll look for that video so that we can see it, so that people again know that what you were talking about, these are things that are still happening and have happened. And these are things that we should not accept to happen in our midst. They're just covered up and not reported on as regularly as unimportant things that are reported on. Or we're now being confused. But with that being said, I won't dwell so much on that. But this message comes from GK in the UK. And GK goes on to say, Hello Desire and Senior Remigius Kintu. How did the Beniginya get to South Sudan? Were they indigenous to South Sudan or they migrated to South Sudan from Ethiopia? I think this is a question for you, Senior Kintu.
Honestly, I don't know how the Baniginya came from South Sudan, whether they originated from somewhere else. The only thing I know is the information I have is that they came from Sudan. By then it was being called Sudan. Within South Sudan is a new thing. Whether it was that portion of South Sudan or another portion, we don't know. We don't know where they came from. But that is all we have. And as you know, they are very secretive. They are not going to tell you, even though a good many of them know where they originated from. That is why you see there is a conflict within the Baniginya and the other group, because the Baniginya are originally from South Sudan, and what is the other group?
The other group was
Abega. They came from Ethiopia-Eritrea corridor. So the one thing we know is that Abega are the ones who are notorious for poisoning and all kinds of vicious murders. The Abanyiginya were just cattle keepers. Of course, they could kill in the fight, but they were not notorious in these devilish practices, which Brother Malik was also referring to.
I'm gonna ask the producer to go ahead and play us a video. And this is going to be, we're now going to see we're heading towards, we're going towards the end of our program today. So if the producer can play us one of our first closing videos, this is going to be a video of the Kibeho massacre. And this was when the RPF killed more than 8,000 people in Kibeho church camp. As you can see, many killings happened in different isolated areas that even to this day we are approximating the number of Hutus that were actually killed in this till this day. So if the producer could please play that, and then we will play the testimonial, and then we will prepare our closing statements, and then we will show you the testimonial video as well.
This is Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, a small country in East Africa, where 25 years ago went through a horrific ordeal where hundreds of thousands of Tutsis were massacred in a genocide, scenes not seen before, only comparable to the worst of human atrocities such as the Holocaust and the like. This is Paul Kagame, who has been hailed by many as someone who has done wonders and miracles in the country that went through such horrific events 25 years ago. Here he is standing with many world leaders, receiving accolades and awards, and being hailed like some kind of savior of that nation. This is Kibeho, a place in the southern part of Rwanda which receives many tourists, many who come on pilgrimages, as it's a special site for many who are in the Roman Catholic faith, a place of beauty, a place of serenity and spirituality, but a place with a horrific past. On the 22nd of April 1995, a year after the genocide in Rwanda, under Paul Kagame's command, his soldiers, who were then the army of Rwanda, were still killing thousands upon thousands of Hutu civilians, mostly women and children. Many people, because of the war that had taken place since 1990, had been internally displaced, or culminated in a genocide in 1994 following the assassination of President Habyarimana of Rwanda and his Burundian counterpart, an assassination that was ordered by Paul Kagame and sparked this violence like never seen before, had resulted in many people moving from their homes. For Paul Kagame and his army, as they were advancing from Uganda into the country, were killing thousands and thousands of people in the northern part of Rwanda, and many of these people who survived these killings found themselves internally displaced within the country. Some of these people found themselves hiding in a place called Kibeho, where the United Nations peacekeepers had set up a safe zone in which these people thought that they were safe. But on April the 22nd in 1995, Kagame's army, led by Colonel Fred Ibingira, now 4-star General Fred Ibingira, came onto this place where there were mostly women and children and opened fire on the crowd. Australian peacekeepers who were there as part of the United Nations peacekeeping force give testimony that there is nothing they could do to stop Kagame's army massacring thousands of people as they watched. 8,000 people lost their lives on that day, and that is a number which many dispute and in fact say more died. Some of the people who were there say that some of the bodies were carried into the Nyungwe forest and burnt, and so in fact many more people lost their lives on that day. The president of Rwanda at the time, Bizimungu, who was in actuality not the president but just a puppet, turned up at the scene shortly after and was told only 300 people died. He then announced that only 300 people died, as if the death of 300 Rwandans is not enough to be a tragedy. But unfortunately, that was not the real number. At least 8,000, mostly women and children, were massacred on this day. Eyewitness accounts of the soldiers that were part of the United Nations mission say that the soldiers came and they opened fire on the crowd. Now the place was enclosed and these people could not run anywhere. And bodies started piling upon bodies piling, women and children being slaughtered by a barrage of bullets, only for the soldiers to take a short lunch break and continue shooting until the hours of the evening. This is a tragedy like many other tragedies that took place in Rwanda, but this is one that has completely been ignored by the international community. Whilst Kagame travels from capital to capital around the world, being given honorary doctorates and awards, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International have said that this is a man that leads a regime that is oppressive. A regime that did not only stop killing in 1995, but continues to kill even today, not only confined to Rwanda, but also to the neighboring countries of Burundi, Uganda, the Congo, and Tanzania. The United Nations, whose peacekeepers stood by and watched as these innocent people were massacred, authored a report in 2010 called the Mapping Report, in which Kagame and his army are accused of a genocide of millions of people in the Congo, and yet nothing has been done. Our children and the future generations will ask hard questions as history looks upon this time and says, how could people be massacred, and yet the culprits are walking free? Not only are they not facing justice, but they are actually applauded. The 22nd of April 1995, 24 years ago, is a tragic day in the history of Rwanda, one of many. And I ask, as you view these photographs, as you listen to this tragic past, that you will not be counted among those that looked away whilst evil took place in this world. That you will not be counted among those that stayed silent whilst criminals ran rampant in this world. Paul Kagame and his cohorts in the RPF are such criminals. Let us hope and pray that as we remember these victims and survivors of the Kibeho tragedy, that also justice for them will start to be done. As we seek justice for all that lost their lives in Rwanda in the genocide in 1994, and in the years subsequent to that, where the army of Paul Kagame massacred millions of people in Rwanda and in the Congo, justice must be served.
You are muted.
As I said, today's program, before it started, our trigger warning was that today was going to be a heavy-hearted program because it covers one of the, I would say, the biggest gangs in the Great Lakes region. They work and function like a gang, but different from a gang because they actually have political power and they have the ability to infiltrate nations, form how nations are run, and facilitate the depletion of resources in that nation, but at a cost, which is now, if we understand the cost, is human lives. People have to die in order for them to successfully carry out their missions. With that being said, we're winding down to the end of our program. There's one last video that will be played, but before that, we will give our closing remarks. And at this point in time, Senior Teacher, I'd like to invite you to give your closing remarks. But before you do that, I think one question that I want us all to hold in our heads, think about how we centered so much the world and the Western world playing a role in our liberation. But when we look at this case in Rwanda, at every corner, the UN is there. At every corner, the United Nations Human Rights, Human Rights Commission is there. In every video, or like things that we have researched, Doctors Without Borders is there. They're always there. But ask yourself this question. Number one is, how come they're always there and unharmed, but the Africans around seem to be dying and are left to fight amongst each other? And number two, and I only ask this question to everyone, the audience member, because it was asked to me once, and it helped me really reevaluate how I wanted to think about myself as a political subject and how I see Africans. I was asked once, you want to join the United Nations or work with the United Nations, but how come they did nothing when the Dinkas were raided, or when war was happening amongst the Dinkas and other groups? They were there. The UN peacekeepers were there. They did nothing. They got on, same thing with Rwanda's genocide. They get on planes and they leave. They were there in Uganda when the Rwandese refugees came into Uganda. They were there in Luero. They were there in Acholi. And right now, they might even be there in Karamoja. but they're unharmed, they take record, and they leave. And number two, who sends them there? Why are they there? And lastly, why are we asked to go and cry to these organizations that have done nothing for us? But that will be all from me today. At this point, I'd like to invite you, Senior Kintu, to please give your closing statement.
Seeing these videos leave me completely lost because I don't even know where to start. As I said earlier, that grief or grieving is the first form of prayer to God. And if I believe, like all of you believe, that there is God, God will never refuse to answer your prayers. Have we prayed to him? No. Because as one person asked a question, if you really believe that being in opposition under Museveni's dictatorship, you are either in prison, dead, or in exile. Those were the words used by our friend when he was at the European Union. I think, was it European Union or in Geneva? The question is, if you are really in opposition, are you in exile? Are you in prison? Or are you dead? No. I am enjoying a good life, floating around the country, going in and out, having a great time, dancing, singing, and having a good time, and also expensive shopping overseas. Then who is in opposition? That's a big question. When you look at those videos, the first thing I want to say, I am not going to accept it. And on that, I am serious. There was no genocide in Rwanda against the Tutsis. There was genocide in Rwanda against the Hutus, period. And please let us not propagate and play in the hands of these imperialist killers who coined this phrase, and they are propagating it constantly. There was no genocide of Tutsis in Rwanda. There was genocide of Hutus in Rwanda, period. It is the Hutus who were killed by the Tutsis. And that is why the Tutsis were able to subdue and conquer these people. It's not the other way around. All the evidence we have looked at, all the empirical evidence we have gathered, leads to one thing: the Tutsis were busy killing Hutus. Yes, there could be some scuffles, and I can't deny that some Tutsis were killed by people who were defending themselves. Now, don't forget, it is the Tutsis who invaded Rwanda, a peaceful, democratically managed country. Why do you glorify invaders? Now, why are you now cursing Putin for sending troops in in Ukraine? And you are calling Putin an invader of a sovereign nation called Ukraine. But you cannot call Kagame an invader of a sovereign nation called Rwanda. Either you are sick in your head, and I don't care whether you are sitting in the White House or 10 Downing Street or wherever. You are just showing us you are an idiot. It is the Hutus who were killed, not the Tutsis, as they purport this false propaganda. Two, the Tutsis who have participated in this whole thing God is fair. It doesn't matter how long it takes. It may take 100 years, but one day you are going to pay the price. I want to give you a quote. Go to the book of Genesis, chapter 18, verse 20 to 32. Genesis chapter 18, verse 20 to 32. Because your crimes against humanity and these people whose dead bodies we have seen, and all those people are now suffering and crying, don't think that God does not see it. Yes, the President of the United States and the United Nations may keep silent, but God ain't silent. And one day he's going to check. This is why we have been having problems with some people calling and saying, oh, not all Batusi are bad. Okay, I want to find 2 good Batusi left, as we see in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. If there are 2, God might say, okay, I will excuse you. But we can't find even 2. So, one of these days, believe me, it is going to happen. And for us Africans, in 1993, on my way from Rwanda, I think it was the month of August, I stopped in Nairobi and met a retired Italian priest. This man was, I think, in his early 70s. We sat down and had dinner and a good wine, and he told me, he said, I've been a missionary in Africa for many years. I think he said pretty close to 40 years. He said, by the look of things, you Africans are not going to survive. I said, Father, what is the problem? Because he knew that we are being surrounded. He knew that we have people, Desire says, the UN men are there, but people are being killed and they are not being killed. Of course, they are there in Eastern Congo. They have been there for many years. But it is them who are watching, but we are dying and they are not dying. The Red Cross is there. We are dying, but they are not dying. The doctors behind, without borders are there. We are dying, but they are not dying. The so-called Human Rights Watch. If you remember the story of Rwanda, there was that woman called Alison DeForge who pretended to be Human Rights Watch, yet she was a CIA agent. And she was assisting the Kagame's people how to advance and kill people, and then turn around and give false propaganda. So what this priest told me, he said, you are not going to make it. You are not going to survive as Africans. But if you will survive, you have one option. And I said, Father, what is that option? If that is the only medicine, he said, organize yourselves and kick out every white person from the continent. Because none of them you should trust. But that's a huge task to do. If you cannot achieve it, you are doomed. My fellow Africans, now you know what we are facing. As long as we have these people grooming and breeding people like Kagame and the Museveni and the Muhoozi, etc., we are in deep manure. But there is no problem without a solution. Let's put our heads together, work together until we find a solution. But This idea of crying to the UN, to the Human Rights Commission in Geneva, blah, 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 all that nonsense, forget it. It ain't going to cut the cake. Let's find a solution. If you remember, our forefathers who fought for independence, they were fighting against the colonialists, and all we knew was colonialists. But who was supporting the colonialists? The Americans, who had no colony in Africa. Of course, the British had colonies. We now know that American Marines and the CIA were with Ian Smith fighting against the Mugabes. We know that they even listed ANC as a terrorist organization which was fighting for their own freedom until they overcame. Now we know who was helping us or who was helping the enemy. We know those countries. Let us be intelligent enough to look at things very critically. And that will be the first step in solving our African problem. But we are betting on the wrong horses. Thank you very much for listening to us today. I hope you have learned something, but don't always learn. Do something. God bless you.
This has also reminded me of something very important about what we've been talking about today when it comes down to holding people accountable. Uganda as well was never held accountable, given the fact that we gave the spark to the start of the Rwandese genocide. This is nowhere on record. I learned about the Rwandese genocide in Uganda. Every year there is an event from primary school, but it is never mentioned the role that Uganda actually even played in activating and making sure that these events would occur as per plan, or even a mention that Kagame was serving as part of the intelligentsia in Uganda. This as well is something that I learned here, that Kagame used to work in the military in Uganda and was part of NRA. So let us not forget that the gang is actually even running Uganda. As you say, this is not an isolated event. And this is planned. What I want us all to remember, these people plan. They are not doing things haphazardly. As you had, what's his name? I always forget that gentleman's name. Is it John, this, the one who served John Bolton? No, is it John? I think his name is John Bolton. He said planning a coup d'etat is not easy. They sit down, strategize, and plan these things. The division that exists today between North Korea and South Korea, that was planned and designed. The African countries that we claim to be our own today in Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, those they sat down and designed. When we say Berlin Conference, it's not just to tell us an event that happened. It's to actually entice your intuition with knowledge that your enemy is planning for your downfall every day. And if you wake up and find out your enemy is 10 steps ahead, what are you going to do? We're far behind, but we're not dead yet. Because if actually we were to die out, we would have already, because they've been planning for our demise for a long time. But we have not yet died out, so let us also begin to plan. Let us take our plans seriously. Let us not take anything for granted. That $250 you're spending on a cruise, or 50 euros you're spending on a cruise, for what? What did you get from there? What was the intel? What are we doing politically? What is the next plan? If anyone can come up and tell me what the next plan is, then I will listen. We need active plans, not only to help us, but to help the whole region as a whole. We need to actually look into the African problem. But if we're not having conversations like that, we will remain where we are, which means you can forget about the continuation of your lineage. Because after 3 generations, you'll be done, unless you want to actually remain in the diaspora, and then become a second-class citizen for generations to come. Because even third-generation people who have been here, as long as you're African, you're still African. We must remember we are a colonized people. Now, yet not that we were colonized before, we still walk as colonial, we're seen as colonial subjects, treated as colonial subjects. That's why they feel that they own our nations and can control and give us purpose. Do you know how disrespectful it is that maybe elsewhere people, it is the ruling class, elsewhere people, there is a people's democracy in other countries, but our countries, it is someone from the European Union or from the White House dictating who's going to become our president. And we have been given propaganda that now we're peaceful nations, now we're going forward, Africa is underdeveloped, developing, all this rubbish. For what? They plan. That's all I want to say today. And knowing that they plan, what should you do? If your enemy plans, you plan harder. If your enemy runs, you run faster. Because at the end of the day, we must win. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone who is on today's program. I want to thank you so much, Senior Kintu, for always coming here with your insight, with your intel. I'm actually grateful, Katonda abadde akutaddeko akasubi, and you're still here today to retell these stories, to really bring life to this information. Because so many of us have been so detached to what it is, and it has become so ceremonious. Every year we celebrate the Rwandan genocide without even knowing the history behind it. But I want to thank God that you still are here today to actually, spread some light on what happened, what has happened in hand with all the information that has been collected thus far, so that we can see the truth for what it is. And may we remember that truth is what you decide to be truth. And every one of us has the ability to look at information, synthesize it, think, and come up with a decision. We do this every day. You decide to wake up, you decide to sleep, you decide to eat. You make those decisions. Now make the right decisions for a futurity of yourself before we all perish. So I want to thank everyone who's been here from the start to the end. Thank our producer, thank the UNN team, and hopefully we will be here next Sunday with another program. Akume atakumi na mpera. Thank you all.
Susanna says that she will die of sorrow. In February, she watched anti-government militia in Burundi rip apart her family.
Urumva nyine hageze saa sita abana bavuye mu ishuri baje kuruhuka badusanga turi mu rugo ngiye guhiga ibyo kurya ndabaha hanyuma abasoda usanga bakikije bose babatemagurira mu nzu ise we Mariya bamutemesha ishoka muganga kugira ngo ahwane sanga n'imibyimba gusa abantu barindwi bose unye n'agahinda kari mu kunyica no gusanduha abansara.
Susanna fled a dead town with her 3 youngest children to Tanzania.
Urumva nabo nk'uko kwezi nyene nabo barabarayemwe bariko barakoma induru batabaza nabo barabasagura barapfa habaye nk'umunyuta koko karere kacu abantu barokotse ngo namba nitwo kwana mukoroko kamwe ko twetuvuye mu ishuri tukata kwinyegeza.
She's one of around 135,000 Burundian refugees here who've escaped horror at home. Manasseh was arrested by pro-government forces that killed his 3 brothers.
Hanyuma bakabafunga mwijoro bazabaraza bagatora bamwe bamwe baza kubica.
He bears the scars of his torturous 3-month stay.
Hanyuma intuze yamaze kugira baca bakubita mwimbugita ya intuze barambanga kunyama imwe.
He eventually made it over the border, but tells of others being arrested or thrown in the river. Tens of thousands of people poured into Tanzania at the start of this conflict. The numbers have fallen as refugees report border blockades. But with a lack of funds, UNHCR and partners are struggling to provide people with more than the basics.
we need to pay attention to the hardship that the refugees are having in the camps in Tanzania. We cannot fail this caseload.
Meanwhile, refugees continue to flee atrocities in Burundi. The survivors can only try to rebuild their lives and wait for peace.